The courtroom was silent except for the rustle of paper as the judge unfolded the first letter. Daniel Carter's hands trembled at the defendant's table. Across the aisle, his late wife's aunt sat rigid in silk and pearls, her lawyer's briefcase thick with documents proving the children deserved better than a failing ranch and a widowed father who couldn't even cook breakfast. But it was the woman beside Daniel, the cook he'd hired 8 months ago, who had changed everything. And now, as the judge began to read his daughter's words aloud, Daniel realized Hannah Brooks had saved them long before they ever stepped into this courtroom. If you want to see how a stranger became the heart of a broken family, stay with me until the end. And comment below what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The Wyoming wind came hard across the plains that February morning, carrying with it the kind of cold that found every crack in a man's armor. Daniel Carter stood at his kitchen window, watching the sun break reluctant over the eastern hills, and felt that cold settle deep in his chest where warmth used to live. 6 months. Half a year since Martha's fever had taken her so fast the doctor barely had time to shake his head. Half a year since Daniel had become both father and mother to 4 children who looked at him with eyes that expected him to have answers he didn't possess. The kitchen behind him was evidence of his failure. Smoke still hung in the air from his latest attempt at breakfast. Biscuits that had emerged from the oven black as coal, eggs that had somehow turned to rubber in the pan. The children had eaten them without complaint, which was worse than if they'd refused. They were trying so hard to be easy, to not be a burden, and it was breaking his heart in ways grief alone couldn't manage. "Papa?" Emily stood in the doorway, her mother's apron wrapped twice around her 13-year-old frame. She'd been wearing it every morning since the funeral, trying to fill a space she was years too young to occupy. "It's all right, Em. I'll clean up." "I can help," but her voice carried the exhaustion of someone who'd been helping too much, too long. "No." Daniel softened his tone. "You get your brothers and sister ready. There's still oatmeal from yesterday." Emily's expression flickered, relief mixed with something that looked like shame, before she nodded and disappeared. Through the thin walls, Daniel heard her gentle voice rousing the boys, then Rosie's sleepy protest. 4 years old and already forgetting what it was like to have a mother who sang her awake. Daniel turned back to the ruins of breakfast and felt the weight of impossibility settle on his shoulders. The ranch work was endless. The cattle needed tending. Fences needed mending. The winter hay was running low, and he needed to negotiate with Morrison about buying more. And somehow, in between all that, he was supposed to keep 4 children fed, clothed, educated, and whole. He was failing at all of it. The front door banged open, and Daniel heard Noah's voice, bright with 10-year-old enthusiasm. "Papa, Mr. Henderson's here!" Daniel wiped his hands on a dish towel and headed out, grateful for the interruption. His neighbor sat astride his gray mare, his weathered face creased with concern. "Morning, Daniel. Saw your smoke signals." Henderson nodded toward the chimney, where black smoke still curled skyward. "Wanted to make sure everything was all right." Daniel managed a rueful smile. "Just my cooking declaring war on the household." Henderson didn't laugh. "That's actually why I stopped by. Mary and I have been talking." He shifted in his saddle, uncomfortable with what he was about to say. "We know you're managing a lot. Mary wondered if maybe the children could take their evening meal with us a few nights a week, just until—" He trailed off, and Daniel felt heat rise in his face. Until what? Until he figured out how to be adequate? Until the children stopped being hungry? "I appreciate it, Henderson, but we're managing." "Daniel," Henderson's voice was gentle but firm. "You're a proud man, and that served you well. But pride doesn't fill bellies or mend torn shirts. There's no shame in accepting help." Before Daniel could respond, 8-year-old Caleb appeared at his elbow, his face smudged with dirt from morning chores. "Is Mrs. Henderson making that pie again? The one with the apples?" The hope in his son's voice was a knife between Daniel's ribs. Henderson looked at Daniel, then back at Caleb. "I expect she could be persuaded." "We're grateful for the thought," Daniel said, his voice tight. "But we're working things out here." After Henderson rode off, Daniel stood in the yard, feeling Caleb's disappointment like a physical presence beside him. The boy said nothing, just kicked at a frozen clod of dirt before wandering back toward the barn. That afternoon, Daniel rode into town with a purpose that felt equal parts necessity and defeat. The general store sat at the corner of Main Street, its windows fogged with February condensation. Inside, proprietor James Walsh looked up from his ledger, his expression shifting to something too close to pity. "Afternoon, Daniel. What can I do for you?" "I need to post a notice." Daniel pulled out the paper he'd written and rewritten a dozen times that morning. "Looking for a cook. Someone who can manage meals and help with the household." Walsh took the paper, reading it over. "Live-in position? There's a room off the kitchen. It's small but private." "Wages?" Walsh's eyebrow rose at the amount. "That's generous. I need someone good, someone who'll stay." Daniel heard the desperation creeping into his voice and hated it. Children need consistency. Walsh pinned the notice to the board by the door, where it joined advertisements for farmhands, seamstresses, and a reward for a stolen horse. "I'll spread the word. Though I have to say, most women looking for work aren't keen on isolated ranches." "I'm not asking for most women, just one good one." Daniel left the store with something that wasn't quite hope, but wasn't quite resignation either. In the empty space between, he allowed himself to imagine competence, someone who could turn eggs into breakfast instead of regret, who could darn socks without creating new holes, who could look at his children without the shadow of pity. The ride home took him past the small cemetery on the hill. He'd meant to ride straight by, but his hands pulled the reins without conscious thought. Martha's grave was marked by a simple headstone, the earth still too fresh above it. Daniel dismounted and stood there, hat in his hands. "I don't know what I'm doing," he said to the frozen ground. "The children are scared to be children. Emily's trying to be you, and that's not fair to her. Noah's angry all the time, but won't say why. Caleb's getting so quiet, I sometimes forget he's in the room. And Rosie," his voice broke. "Rosie asked me yesterday when you were coming home." The wind was his only answer, carrying with it the smell of snow and sage. "I'm hiring help, someone to cook and keep house. I know you'd have thoughts about that." He could almost hear Martha's voice, practical, warm, with that hint of teasing. "But I need help, Martha. Our children need more than I can give them alone." He stayed until the cold drove him back to his horse, carrying with him the certainty that Martha, wherever she was, would understand. She'd always been the practical one. 3 days passed with no response to his advertisement. The kitchen remained a disaster. Emily's shoulders stayed hunched with responsibility, and Daniel's hope began to thin like the winter hay. On the 4th day, he was in the barn checking on a pregnant mare when Noah came running. "Papa, there's someone here!" Daniel emerged into the late afternoon light to see a woman dismounting from a sturdy bay horse. She wore a practical riding dress the color of dried sage, her dark hair pulled back in a simple bun. As she turned, Daniel saw a face that spoke of determination rather than beauty. Strong features, direct eyes, and a mouth set in a line that suggested she didn't suffer fools. "Mr. Carter?" Her voice was clear, without the breathless quality some women affected. "I'm here about the position." "You rode out alone?" The ranch was 12 miles from town, the road rough and isolated. "I did." She met his eyes without flinching. "I'm Hannah Brooks. I saw your notice in town." Daniel became aware of his appearance. 3 days of patchy beard growth, his shirt stained with barn work, his hair doing whatever it pleased. Behind him, he could hear the children gathering, drawn by the novelty of a visitor. "I wasn't expecting—" He trailed off, unsure how to finish. "Someone capable of the ride?" Hannah's expression held the faintest hint of amusement. "Or someone at all?" "Both, I suppose." She turned her attention to the children, who had arranged themselves in the barn doorway like a jury. Emily held Rosie's hand. Noah stood with his arms crossed, his expression skeptical. Caleb peeked from behind his older brother. "You must be Emily," Hannah said, her voice softening slightly. "Your father mentioned in his advertisement that there were 4 children. You look like you've been managing quite a bit." Emily's chin came up, defensive. "We do all right." "I'm sure you do." Hannah turned back to Daniel. "Shall we discuss the position, Mr. Carter? Or would you prefer I ride back to town without conversation?" Daniel felt the weight of 4 pairs of eyes on his back. "No, please, come inside." The kitchen revealed its chaos like an accusation. Dishes from 3 meals crowded the table. The floor needed sweeping. The stove was cold. Hannah took it all in with a single sweeping glance that Daniel couldn't quite read. "Coffee?" he offered, then remembered the pot was empty and the grounds were who knows where. "Perhaps later." Hannah set her traveling bag down by the door. "Mr. Carter, your advertisement said you need a cook. Let me be clear about what I'm offering. I'm not a cook. I'm not a maid. I'm not a nursemaid or a teacher or a substitute for what you've lost." Daniel felt his hope crumble. "Then I'm not sure why you rode 12 miles. Because what you need isn't just someone to make breakfast. You need someone who can restore order to chaos, who can teach children how to manage a household so they can become capable adults, who can create a home rather than just a place to eat and sleep." Her eyes held his. "That's what I'm offering. The question is whether that's what you're willing to accept." Emily spoke up, her voice sharp. "We don't need someone coming in here and changing everything. This is our home." Hannah turned to face her fully. "You're right, it is your home. And from what I can see, you've been trying to hold it together all by yourself. That's admirable. It's also unsustainable." Her voice gentled. "How old are you?" 13? When I was 13, I was learning to bake bread and can preserves. I wasn't trying to mother my siblings while grieving my own mother. There's a difference between helping and bearing weight meant for adults. Emily's eyes filled with sudden tears she refused to let fall. "Someone has to do it." "Yes, but that someone shouldn't be you." Hannah looked back at Daniel. "Mr. Carter, I can be here by sunrise tomorrow if you want me. Or I can ride back to town and you can continue as you are. But make no mistake, what you have here isn't working, and those children know it better than you do." The brutal honesty should have angered him. Instead, Daniel felt something like relief flood his chest. Here was someone who saw the truth and didn't pretend otherwise. "What are your terms?" "The wages you posted are fair. I'll need that room off the kitchen. Private space matters when living with a family. I'll manage all meals, household cleaning, and laundry. I'll teach the children to help appropriately for their ages. And Mr. Carter?" She paused. "I expect you to stay out of the kitchen unless I invite you in. You hired help. Let me help." Noah made a sound that might have been a laugh. "Does that mean Papa can't burn breakfast anymore?" "That's exactly what it means." Daniel felt the children's tension shift, not quite relaxing, but considering. He thought about Henderson's pity, Walsh's raised eyebrow, Emily's exhausted shoulders, and his own failure at every domestic task Martha had made look effortless. "Can you start tomorrow?" "I can start now." Hannah picked up her bag. "Show me that room, then show me your larder. We'll need to make a list for town. I'm guessing you're low on actual cooking supplies and heavy on failed experiments." As Daniel led her through the kitchen, he heard Noah whisper to Caleb, "I think Papa just hired a general." "More like a sergeant," Emily muttered, but there was something in her voice that wasn't quite resentment. The room off the kitchen was indeed small, barely space for a narrow bed, a chest of drawers, and a washstand. Hannah surveyed it with an expression Daniel couldn't read. "Will it do?" he asked. "It's private, it's clean, and it's not a barn. It'll do." She set her bag on the bed. "Now, let's see what you have to work with." The larder was a monument to good intentions and poor execution. Bags of flour had been left open, attracting mice. Potatoes had sprouted in their bin. The coffee tin was nearly empty. Hannah made notes in a small journal she pulled from her pocket, her expression growing more severe with each discovery. "When was the last time you had a proper meal in this house?" Daniel had to think. "Christmas. Neighbors brought food. That was 2 months ago." "We've been eating." "Eating and eating well are different things." She turned to face him. "Mr. Carter, I'm going to be direct with you because I suspect you respect that more than delicacy. Your children are grieving, and they're hungry, and they're trying to be brave because they think that's what you need from them. You're grieving too, and you're overwhelmed, and you're trying to do everything alone because you think that's what strength looks like. But strength isn't refusing help. Strength is knowing when to accept it." Daniel felt something crack in his chest, some wall he'd been building brick by stubborn brick since Martha died. "I don't know how to do this." "I know. That's why I'm here." Hannah's voice was firm, but not unkind. "Now, I need you to take me to town tomorrow. We'll need supplies, and I want to see what's available. Meanwhile, tonight we'll make do with what you have. What we have isn't much. Then we'll make much of what little there is. Within an hour, Hannah had transformed the kitchen from chaos into a workshop. She set Emily to sorting through the larder, removing anything spoiled. She sent Noah to the root cellar for preserved vegetables. Caleb was assigned to sweep the floor, a task he approached with unusual enthusiasm. And Rosie, shy, quiet Rosie, was invited to sit at the table and help by arranging spoons in a pattern. Daniel watched from the doorway as Hannah moved through the space with an efficiency that was almost startling. She'd found some salvageable flour, cornmeal, and salt pork. The stove, neglected and cold, came to life under her attention. Soon the smell of cornbread filled the room, then the sizzle of pork and onions. "Emily," Hannah said, not looking up from her work. "Set the table, please. Noah, there's a pitcher on the shelf. Fill it with water. Caleb, those spoons your sister arranged. We'll need them." The children moved to obey, and Daniel noticed something he hadn't seen in months. They moved without the weight of anxiety. They were being children given appropriate tasks, not children trying to be adults. An hour later, they sat down to a meal that was simple but complete. Cornbread, still warm from the oven, fried salt pork with onions, green beans from the cellar, and water in clean glasses. Daniel waited for someone to speak, to break the strange new silence that wasn't quite uncomfortable but wasn't familiar either. Instead, Hannah simply passed the cornbread to Emily. "Would you share with your sister?" Emily took the platter and carefully selected the best piece for Rosie before taking one for herself. The gesture was small, but Daniel saw Hannah's slight nod of approval. They ate. The food wasn't fancy. Martha would have added herbs, would have made the cornbread sweeter. But it was warm and filling and made with competence. Halfway through the meal, Rosie looked up at Hannah with wide eyes. "It's good." "Thank you, sweetheart. Would you like more?" Rosie nodded, and Hannah served her without fuss, without making it into something more than it was. After dinner, Hannah orchestrated the cleanup with the same quiet efficiency. Everyone had a role. Everyone contributed. And when it was done, she turned to Emily. "Tomorrow, I'll show you how I organize a kitchen. Not because you need to do it all yourself, but because these are good skills to have. All right?" Emily hesitated, then nodded. Some of the defensive tension had left her shoulders. "Noah, Caleb, your father says there's schoolwork to finish. Get to it. Rosie, it's almost bedtime. Let's see about getting you ready." Daniel found himself standing uselessly in his own home, watching this stranger guide his children through an evening routine that actually flowed rather than fractured. "Mr. Carter?" Hannah paused at the bottom of the stairs, Rosie's hand in hers. "You look exhausted. When these children are in bed, I suggest you follow suit. Tomorrow we start building something better. But tonight we all need rest." After the children were settled, Rosie tucked in with less protest than Daniel had managed in weeks. He found Hannah in the kitchen, making notes in her journal by lamplight. "I don't know how to thank you." She looked up. "Don't thank me yet. This was the easy part. The real work starts tomorrow." "What's the real work?" "Teaching them they don't have to carry everything alone. Teaching you the same thing." She closed her journal. "Mr. Carter, you hired me to cook. But what your family needs is someone to help you all remember how to be a family again. That's going to take more than good meals. Can it be done?" For the first time, Hannah smiled, a small expression that made her stern features almost gentle. "I wouldn't have ridden 12 miles if I didn't think so." That night, lying in his empty bed, Daniel listened to the quiet house and realized the silence was different. Not the silence of people too exhausted to speak, but the silence of people who'd eaten well and were sleeping soundly. He thought about Hannah's words. Strength is knowing when to accept help. He thought about Emily's shoulders losing some of their tension. He thought about Rosie eating seconds without being coaxed, and he thought about his own relief at having someone in the house who knew what needed doing and did it without asking permission. Tomorrow he'd take Hannah to town for supplies. Tomorrow they'd start this new arrangement in earnest. Tomorrow he'd see if a hired cook could really help heal a broken family. But tonight, for the first time in 6 months, Daniel Carter allowed himself something that felt dangerously close to hope. End of part 1. 3,789 words. The next morning arrived with unexpected grace. Daniel woke to the smell of coffee, real coffee, strong and hot, and followed his nose downstairs to find Hannah already at work. The kitchen, which yesterday had been a disaster zone, was now clean and organized. The stove radiated warmth, and on the table sat a breakfast that made his eyes sting. Scrambled eggs that were actually fluffy, bacon fried crisp but not burnt, and biscuits that were golden brown instead of charcoal black. "You're up early," he said. Hannah looked up from the stove. "Ranching starts early. Breakfast should be ready when the work is." She gestured to the table. "Sit, eat. The children will be down soon and we need to discuss the trip to town." Daniel sat and took his first bite of proper food in months. The biscuit was tender, slightly sweet, perfect. He closed his eyes. "All right?" Hannah's voice held concern. "Better than all right? These are—" He trailed off, not wanting to say they were as good as Martha's, but they were. Different, but equally competent. "They're biscuits, Mr. Carter. Good ones, but not magic." Hannah poured him coffee. "Though I'll admit, the bar was set low." Despite everything, Daniel laughed. The sound surprised him. The children thundered down the stairs in their usual morning chaos, then stopped short at the sight of the laden table. Emily's eyes went wide. Noah's mouth opened. Caleb just stared, and Rosie clapped her hands together. "We get to eat all of this?" Noah asked, his tone skeptical, as if expecting it to be a trick. "Every bite," Hannah said. "Sit down. Food's better hot." They sat, they ate, and Daniel watched his children fill their plates without hesitation, watched them eat until they were satisfied instead of just no longer hungry. The difference was stark. "Mr. Carter," Hannah said as she refilled coffee cups, "I've made a list for town. We'll need flour, sugar, yeast, salt, lard, dried beans, rice, coffee, tea, molasses, and whatever vegetables look fresh. Also chicken feed. I noticed your flock is low, and I'll need fabric." "Fabric?" "Those children need new clothes. Growing bodies don't stop growing just because there's been a loss." She said it matter-of-factly, without sentiment. "I can sew. It's more economical than buying ready-made." Daniel thought about his dwindling finances and nodded. "Whatever you need." "I'll also need your trust." He looked up from his plate. "What?" "You hired me to do a job, but you're used to controlling everything in your household. That's natural for a man who's been managing alone. But if I'm going to help, you need to let me actually help. That means trusting my judgment about meals, about household management, about the children." Emily stiffened. "Papa doesn't need—" "Emily," Hannah interrupted gently but firmly. "Your father is an excellent rancher. I'm sure he can manage cattle, mend fences, and handle all the outdoor work better than I ever could. But inside this house, I know what I'm doing, and so do you. You've been doing it alone for months. Imagine if you didn't have to anymore." Emily looked at her father, then at her plate. When she spoke, her voice was small. "That would be, good." Daniel felt his throat tighten. His daughter had been drowning, and he'd been too busy drowning himself to notice how deep the water had gotten. "You have my trust, Miss Brooks." "Hannah," she corrected. "If I'm living in your house and raising your children, formality seems unnecessary." The trip to town was accomplished with unusual efficiency. Hannah moved through the general store like a general organizing a campaign, her list comprehensive but not wasteful. She tested flour for freshness, examined dried beans for weevils, and negotiated with Walsh for a better price on bulk purchases. "You drive a hard bargain, Miss Brooks," Walsh said, wrapping packages. "I manage a household on a working ranch, Mr. Walsh. Every penny matters." Daniel found himself simply following along, providing the money and the muscle for carrying parcels. It was oddly freeing to let someone else make the decisions. At the dry goods store, Hannah selected fabric with the same practical eye. "Emily needs 2 new dresses, one for every day, one for church. The boys need shirts and trousers. Rosie's growing out of everything." She held up a bolt of deep blue calico. "This will wear well and hide stains, and this brown wool will be good for the boys." "What about you?" Daniel asked, surprising himself. Hannah paused. "What about me?" "You rode out here in your only good dress. You'll need work clothes." "I'll manage." "Hannah." He used her first name deliberately. "You just said every penny matters. You're right, but so does practicality. You can't cook and clean in silk. She studied him for a long moment, then nodded. Sensible gray cotton, 2 lengths. As they loaded the wagon, Daniel noticed people watching. Mrs. Walsh whispered to Mrs. Morrison. Henderson tipped his hat, but his expression held questions. The town would talk. Widower hiring a live-in woman barely 6 months after his wife's death. Daniel found he didn't care. On the ride home, Hannah was quiet, watching the landscape roll past. You're not from around here, Daniel said. It wasn't a question. Indiana originally. I've been in Wyoming 3 years. What brought you west? The same thing that brings most people. A chance to start over. She glanced at him. I had a position in Cheyenne managing a boarding house. When I saw your advertisement, something about it felt right. What felt right about a failing ranch and 4 grieving children? The honesty. Hannah adjusted her shawl against the wind. You didn't promise easy work or pleasant conditions. You said you needed help, and you were willing to pay fair wages for it. That's more than most men would admit. Daniel thought about his time standing at Martha's grave, admitting he didn't know what he was doing. Maybe honesty was all he had left. The first week passed in a rhythm Daniel hadn't known he was missing. Hannah rose before dawn and had breakfast ready when the family gathered. She packed lunches for the children to take to their lessons with the neighbor who served as their teacher. She organized the household chores with a system that meant everyone contributed, but no one carried the whole weight. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, things began to change. Emily started sleeping past dawn instead of jerking awake at first light, trying to start breakfast before her father could ruin it. Noah's anger, which had been simmering just under the surface for months, found outlet in splitting wood and repairing fence posts, hard physical work that Hannah encouraged rather than trying to gentle away. Caleb discovered that cooking actually interested him, and Hannah let him help with bread making, his small hands kneading dough under her patient instruction. But it was Rosie who showed the biggest transformation. The 4-year-old had been so quiet, so still, as if afraid that moving or speaking would cause more loss. Hannah coaxed her back to life with simple things, letting her arrange flowers in a jar, teaching her to snap green beans, reading to her in the evenings. One afternoon, Daniel came in from the barn to find Rosie sitting at Hannah's feet, playing with wooden spoons while Hannah rolled out pie dough. Is it ready? Rosie asked, her voice stronger than Daniel had heard in months. Almost, sweetheart. Want to help me crimp the edges? Yes! Rosie scrambled up and Hannah lifted her onto a stool, guiding her little fingers to press the dough into decorative patterns. Daniel stood in the doorway, watching, and felt something shift in his chest. This wasn't Martha. It would never be Martha. But it was something the children desperately needed, an adult who was steady, present, and not drowning in her own grief. That evening, after the children were in bed, Daniel found Hannah on the porch, wrapped in a shawl against the spring cold. She held a cup of tea and was watching the stars emerge. You've done something I couldn't, he said, joining her. I've cooked meals and organized laundry, Mr. Carter. Nothing miraculous. Daniel, and it's more than that. You've given them permission to be children again. Hannah was quiet for a long moment. They're good children. They just needed someone who wasn't struggling as much as they were. Is that why you took this job? Because I was struggling? Partly. She sipped her tea. But also because I know what it's like to rebuild after loss. My father died when I was 12. My mother tried to hold everything together alone. She succeeded, but at a cost. I watched her age 10 years in one. I thought maybe I could spare your children from watching the same thing happen to you. Daniel felt seen in a way that was uncomfortable but necessary. I've been failing them. You've been grieving. There's a difference. Hannah turned to look at him. But grief doesn't pause the world. Those children needed someone to keep living while you figured out how to live again. That's all I've done. That's not a small thing. No, she agreed. It's not. They stood in companionable silence, watching the stars, and Daniel realized he'd just had the most honest conversation he'd experienced since Martha died. No one in town wanted to speak directly about loss or failure or the messy work of continuing. Everyone offered platitudes and casseroles and carefully averted eyes. Hannah offered truth. And somehow, that was what he needed most. The second week brought its first challenge. Emily, who had been cautiously accepting of Hannah's presence, suddenly turned cold and defensive. She refused Hannah's help with her dressmaking lesson, burned the biscuits she insisted on making alone, and snapped at her brothers when they asked for help with their chores. Daniel watched it happen with helpless frustration. At dinner, Emily picked at her food while the rest of the family ate with appetite. "Emily," he started, but Hannah shook her head slightly. After the meal, Hannah caught Emily before she could escape to her room. "Walk with me." It wasn't a question, and Emily, surprised, followed Hannah out into the evening. Daniel watched from the window as the two walked toward the barn, their figures silhouetted against the setting sun. They were gone for nearly an hour. When they returned, Emily's eyes were red, but her expression was calmer. She went straight to her room, and Hannah came to the kitchen where Daniel was pretending to review ranch accounts. "What happened?" Hannah poured herself tea before answering. "She's angry, not at me specifically, though I'm a convenient target. She's angry at her mother for dying, angry at you for surviving, angry at herself for being angry." "How do you know?" "Because I asked her, directly. Children respond to honesty better than we think." Hannah sat across from him. "She's also afraid." "Of what?" "That if she accepts me, she's betraying her mother's memory. That if she stops trying to be the woman of the house, she's abandoning her family. That if she admits she's just a 13-year-old girl who misses her mother, she'll fall apart and never put herself back together." Daniel's eyes burned. "What did you tell her?" "That her mother would want her to be 13, not 30. That accepting help isn't betrayal. That grief and life can exist in the same space." Hannah met his gaze. "And I told her that I'm not trying to replace anyone. I'm just trying to help her family survive until they can thrive again." "What did she say?" "Nothing. She cried. I let her. And then she asked if I could teach her how to make that pie crust that doesn't fall apart." Hannah smiled slightly. "We'll start tomorrow." The transformation wasn't immediate or magical. Emily still had hard days, they all did. But gradually, the house began to feel less like a place where people existed separately, in their grief, and more like a place where a family was learning to function again. Hannah's presence became as natural as the sunrise. She learned each child's quirks and needs. She discovered that Noah responded better to clear expectations than to sympathy, that Caleb needed quiet encouragement, that Rosie bloomed under gentle attention. She learned that Daniel drank his coffee black and strong, that he hated mornings but loved the stillness of evening, that he carried guilt like a physical weight. And without meaning to, Daniel learned things about Hannah. She hummed while she worked, old hymns and folk songs she didn't seem to realize she was singing. She read in the evenings, books borrowed from the teacher or purchased on her rare trips to town. She had a quiet laugh that only emerged when genuinely surprised by something funny. She was stern but fair, demanding but patient, practical but kind. She was, Daniel realized with some alarm, becoming essential. It happened on a Tuesday morning in late April. Daniel came in from the barn to find Hannah at the stove, teaching Rosie how to crack eggs without getting shell in the bowl. Rosie's tongue was caught between her teeth in concentration. Hannah's hand guided hers gently. "Like this, sweetheart. Tap, crack, open. See?" "I did it!" Rosie's face glowed with accomplishment. "You absolutely did. Now, let's do another one." Daniel stood there watching and felt something in his chest that wasn't grief or guilt or exhaustion. It was something warmer, something that felt dangerous and necessary at the same time. He was falling in love with his cook. The realization should have terrified him. Martha had been gone less than a year. The town already gossiped about the live-in help. Emily was just starting to accept Hannah's presence. Every rational part of his mind said this was too soon, too complicated, too much. But his heart, stubborn and insistent, pointed out that Hannah had brought his family back from the edge of collapse, that his children laughed again because of her, that he went to sleep each night feeling less like a failure because she was there, competent and calm, holding things together while he learned how to do the same. That evening, after the children were in bed, Daniel found himself lingering in the kitchen where Hannah was finishing the day's cleaning. "Can I help?" She looked up, surprised. "I thought you were reviewing accounts." "They can wait. I'd rather—" He trailed off, not sure what he'd rather do except be in the same room with her. Hannah studied him for a long moment, then handed him a dish towel. "You can dry." They worked in silence, the comfortable kind that spoke of familiarity, rather than awkwardness. When the last dish was put away, Hannah turned to face him. Daniel, is something wrong? No. Yes. I don't know. He set down the towel. Hannah, I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly. All right. Are you planning to stay? The question hung between them. Hannah's expression shifted, becoming careful. My contract was for a year. I know what the contract says. I'm asking what you're planning. Why does it matter? Because the children are attached to you, because this household runs because you run it, because... He stopped, not ready to say the rest. Hannah waited, her dark eyes steady on his face. Because I don't want you to leave, he finished quietly. Daniel, I'm not asking for anything you're not willing to give. I just need to know if we're preparing for eventual loss or if there's a possibility of something permanent. Hannah crossed her arms, not defensively, but as if holding herself together. You're asking the wrong question. What's the right question? Whether I want to stay. Whether this has become more than a position to me. She paused. And the answer is yes. This family has become important to me. These children have become important. You've become important. Daniel felt his heart rate increase. Then stay. It's not that simple. I'm your employee. You're my employer. The town already talks. If I stay beyond what's proper, let them talk. Daniel, think about your children, about what people will say, about what it means for Emily to see. I am thinking about my children. They're thriving because of you. They're becoming whole again because you showed up and refused to let us all drown in grief and inadequacy. He moved closer. Hannah, I'm not asking you to be anything you don't want to be, but if there's a chance, if there's any possibility that you might feel, I do, she said quietly, cutting off his stammering. Feel, I mean, more than I should, more than is wise. But Daniel, I can't be a substitute for what you lost. You're not. You're something different, something necessary in its own way. He took a breath. I loved Martha with everything I had. Her loss nearly destroyed me. But you brought me back. You brought us all back. And what I'm starting to feel for you isn't betrayal of her memory. It's survival. It's the possibility of living again instead of just existing. Hannah's eyes shone with unshed tears. This is too soon. Maybe, probably. But here's what I know. You're already part of this family in every way that matters except name. And I'd like to change that. You're asking me to marry you. Eventually, when enough time has passed that it won't scandalize the county. When the children are ready for that transition. When you're certain of what you want. He reached out, then stopped, not sure if touch was allowed. But I'm asking you now if you'd consider the possibility. If you'd think about staying not as an employee, but as a wife, Hannah finished. A mother to your children. Yes, she turned away, gripping the edge of the sink, her shoulders tight. Do you know what you're asking? To step into a dead woman's shoes? To mother children who may never fully accept me? To be the subject of gossip and judgment for choosing a man barely widowed? Yes, and I know it's not fair to ask. But life hasn't been fair to any of us lately, and we're doing the best we can with what we have. Hannah was quiet for so long Daniel thought he'd destroyed everything. Then she turned back, her expression composed but her eyes vulnerable. I'll consider it. But Daniel, we do this slowly. We let the children adjust. We don't rush into anything that could hurt them or damage what we've built. Agreed. And we're honest with each other, always, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. She nodded, then surprised him by reaching out to briefly touch his hand. Thank you for asking, for seeing me as more than just the help. Hannah, you stopped being just the help about 2 hours after you arrived. She smiled, that small expression that transformed her stern features, and Daniel felt hope kindle in his chest alongside the love he was trying not to rush into. They didn't speak of it again for several days, both giving space for the question to breathe. But something had shifted between them, a possibility acknowledged, a future imagined. And then, on a Thursday afternoon in early May, everything changed. Daniel was in the north pasture, checking fences, when Emily came riding hard across the field, her face pale. Papa, there's a letter. A man brought it from town and he's waiting for an answer. Daniel's stomach dropped. Official letters never brought good news. He rode back with Emily, his mind racing through possibilities. At the house, Hannah stood on the porch, a cream-colored envelope in her hands and an expression Daniel couldn't read. "What is it?" She handed him the letter. "It's from your late wife's aunt, the one in Denver." Daniel tore open the envelope, scanning the precise handwriting within. His blood went cold. "Dear Mr. Carter, it has come to my attention that you are raising 4 children under conditions that may not be suitable for their proper development and education. As Martha's closest living relative and a woman of means, I believe it is my duty to ensure her children receive the advantages and stability she would have wanted for them. I am therefore petitioning for custody of Emily, Noah, Caleb, and Rose. I can provide them with education, refinement, and opportunities far beyond what a struggling ranch can offer. I have consulted with attorneys and will be filing formal papers within the week. I trust you will see reason and agree to what is best for the children without forcing a prolonged legal battle. Regards, Mrs. Adelaide Thornton." Daniel read it twice, the words not making sense. Adelaide Thornton, Martha's aunt, a wealthy widow Daniel had met exactly once at his wedding. She'd made no effort to contact the family after Martha's death, hadn't attended the funeral, hadn't written to the children, and now she wanted to take them away. Daniel read the letter a third time, his hands shaking with a rage so pure it felt clean. Hannah stepped closer, her voice low and steady. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to fight." He looked up at her, then at Emily, who stood frozen on the porch steps. "No one is taking my children." The messenger, a young clerk from the law office in Cheyenne, cleared his throat nervously. "Mr. Carter, Mrs. Thornton asked me to wait for your response. She hoped you might see reason without—" "You can tell Mrs. Thornton," Daniel said, his voice cutting sharp as winter wind, "that she'll see me in court before she sees my children in her house. Now get off my property." The clerk scrambled onto his horse and rode off, dust rising behind him like a warning. Emily's face had gone white as chalk. "Papa, she can't really take us, can she?" Before Daniel could answer, Noah burst out of the barn, Caleb close behind. "Who was that man? Em said something about a letter." "Inside," Hannah said firmly. "All of you, now." They gathered in the kitchen, the children's faces showing varying degrees of fear and confusion. Rosie, sensing the tension, climbed into Hannah's lap without asking. Hannah's arms closed around her automatically. Daniel stood at the head of the table, the letter clutched in his fist. "Your mother's aunt, Adelaide Thornton, has decided she wants custody of you." "I don't even know who that is," Noah said, his voice rising. "She came to the wedding," Daniel said. "Fancy dress. Looked down her nose at the ranch. Your mother hadn't seen her in years before that." "And now she wants us?" Emily's voice cracked. "Why?" "Because she's wealthy and bored and has decided you're her project." Daniel forced himself to breathe, to think instead of just rage. "She's claiming the ranch isn't fit, that you need education and refinement." "This is our home," Caleb said, his quiet voice suddenly fierce. "We don't want refinement. We want to stay here." "I know, son. And you will." "How?" Noah demanded. "If she's got lawyers and money, Papa, what do we have?" The question hung in the air like an accusation. What did they have? A struggling ranch, a father who'd been failing at basic parenting 6 months ago, a household held together by a hired cook who had no legal standing in the family. "We have each other," Hannah said quietly, "and we have the truth. The truth that 6 months ago we were eating burnt eggs and wearing patched clothes?" Emily's voice broke. "The truth that Papa couldn't even make breakfast without setting the kitchen on fire? The truth," Hannah continued, her voice cutting through Emily's panic, "that you are loved children being raised by a father who works himself to exhaustion to provide for you. The truth that you have a home, community, stability. The truth that you're thriving. Are we?" Noah's face was flushed, his hands clenched. "Because it sounds like some judge is going to look at us and see exactly what that letter says. A bunch of ranch kids with a father who needed to hire help just to keep us fed." "Noah," Daniel started. "It's true, isn't it?" Noah pushed back from the table. "We were a mess. We still are. And now some rich lady is going to swoop in and take us to Denver, where we'll have to wear fancy clothes and go to fancy schools and—" His voice broke. "I don't want to leave." "You're not going to," Daniel said, But even he could hear the uncertainty beneath his words. That night, after the children were finally settled, though not sleeping, judging by the whispers and creaking floorboards above, Daniel sat at the kitchen table with Hannah, trying to form a plan from the wreckage of his thoughts. "I need a lawyer," he said. "Someone good enough to stand up to whatever fancy legal minds Adelaide brings from Denver. Can you afford that? I'll sell cattle if I have to, mortgage the ranch, whatever it takes." Hannah was quiet, her fingers tracing patterns on the worn wood of the table. "Daniel, I need to tell you something, and you're not going to like it." His stomach tightened. "What?" "That woman is going to use me against you." "What do you mean?" "Think about it. A widower barely 6 months past his wife's death, living with an unmarried woman under his roof. No matter how proper our arrangement, no matter that I sleep in a separate room and there's been nothing improper, it looks bad." Daniel felt cold realization wash over him. "She'll say you're proof I'm unfit, that I've brought scandal into my home." "Exactly, and she won't be entirely wrong in how it appears." Hannah met his eyes. "Daniel, I should leave, at least temporarily, until after the custody hearing." "No." The word came out harder than he intended. "No, you're not leaving. If my presence hurts your case, your presence is the only reason I have a case." Daniel stood, pacing the kitchen. 6 months ago, Noah was right. We were a disaster. The children were hungry and wearing rags and trying to mother themselves because I couldn't manage basic care. You changed that. You gave them stability and routine, and I'm still an unmarried woman living in your house." Daniel stopped pacing, a wild idea forming. "Then marry me." Hannah stared at him. "What? Marry me?" "Not someday when enough time has passed and the town stops gossiping. Now, this week, before the hearing." "Daniel, that's insane." "Is it? Think about it. Adelaide wants to claim this house is unstable and improper, but a stable 2-parent household? That's exactly what judges want to see." "You want to marry me to win a court case?" "I want to marry you because I love you," Daniel said, the words tumbling out raw and honest. "Because you've become essential to me and to my children. Because when I imagine my future, you're in it. But yes, right now, I also want to marry you because it protects my family." Hannah stood slowly, her face unreadable. "That's not enough of a reason. It's not the only reason. Daniel, marriage should be about more than legal strategy." "You're right. It should be about partnership, about 2 people building a life together, supporting each other, raising children together." He moved closer. "Tell me you haven't been doing exactly that for the past 3 months." "As your employee?" "As my partner." "Hannah, please. I know this is fast. I know it's not romantic or proper or any of the things you probably imagined, but it's real. What we have is real." Hannah's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "And what happens after the hearing, when you don't need the legal protection anymore? Do you wake up one day and regret the hasty marriage you made to keep your children?" "No." Daniel took her hands, feeling her fingers tremble in his. "I'll wake up grateful that crisis forced me to stop being cautious and claim what I want. Hannah, I'm asking you to marry me. Not just for the children's sake, though they need you. Not just for the court case, though it helps. I'm asking because I want you as my wife." She pulled her hands away, wrapping her arms around herself. "I need to think. We don't have much time. The hearing—" "I know." Her voice was sharp, then softened. "I know. But Daniel, this is my whole life you're asking me to reshape on a week's notice. Let me think." He nodded, watching her walk away to her small room off the kitchen. The door closed with a quiet click that felt louder than a slam. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. Henderson rode up as Daniel was doing morning chores, his expression grim. "Heard about the letter," he said without preamble. "Town's talking." "Of course it is." Daniel continued mucking out the stall, using the physical work to channel his frustration. "Some folks saying Adelaide Thornton might have a point. That maybe those children would be better off with a woman's care, proper education, advantages." Daniel's grip tightened on the pitchfork. "Some folks should mind their own business." "Daniel, I'm on your side. Mary and I both are. But you need to know what you're up against." Henderson shifted in his saddle. "There's talk about Miss Brooks, too. About how it looks, her living here. Hannah runs my household and cares for my children. There's nothing improper about it." "I know that. You know that. But appearances matter to judges. Henderson paused. I'm not saying this to hurt you. I'm saying it because you need to prepare for what that woman's lawyers are going to argue. After Henderson left, Daniel found Hannah in the kitchen, kneading bread with unusual force. The children were at their lessons, giving them rare privacy. You heard? He asked. Every word. The window was open. She punched the dough. He's right, you know, about how it looks. I don't care how it looks. You should. Hannah shaped the dough into a loaf with practiced efficiency. Daniel, I've made my decision. His heart stopped. And? I'll marry you, but on 2 conditions. Relief flooded through him. Name them. First, we're honest with the children about why this is happening now. No pretending it's some grand romance. They deserve the truth. Agreed. And second? Hannah set the loaf pan aside and turned to face him fully. After the hearing, after the custody issue is settled, if you want to end this marriage, I'll go quietly. No fuss, no demands. You'll have done your duty to protect your children, and I'll have done mine to help. Hannah, I mean it, Daniel. I won't trap you in a marriage you made under duress. Give it a year. If you still want me as your wife, truly want me, then we'll make it permanent. But if you wake up and realize you married me out of desperation and guilt, I need to know I can leave with dignity. It wasn't what he wanted. He wanted her to believe in his love, in their future, but he saw the fear beneath her practical words. She was protecting herself the only way she knew how. All right, he said, 1 year, but Hannah, I'm not going to change my mind. We'll see. That evening, they gathered the children in the parlor. Emily sat rigid, her hands clenched in her lap. Noah sprawled in apparent casualness that didn't hide his tension. Caleb perched on the edge of his seat, and Rosie tucked herself against Hannah's side. Daniel looked at Hannah, who nodded slightly. Together, they would face this. Your father and I are getting married, Hannah said, her voice steady and clear. The silence was absolute. Then Noah laughed, a harsh sound without humor. Of course you are. That's the perfect solution, isn't it? The fancy aunt can't claim the house is improper if there's a wife. Noah, Daniel said sharply. No, he's right. Hannah's voice was calm. That is part of why we're doing this now, this quickly. Your father needs to show the court that this is a stable, proper household. A married couple raising children together looks better than a widower with hired help. Emily's face had gone pale. You're using each other. We're helping each other, Hannah corrected, but I'm not going to lie to you and pretend this is some fairy tale. Your father and I have grown to care for each other deeply over these past months. We would likely have married eventually, but yes, the custody threat is forcing us to move faster than we might have otherwise. Do you love him? The question came from Caleb, his quiet voice cutting through the tension. Hannah looked at Daniel, her expression vulnerable. Yes, I do. Papa? Emily's voice shook. Do you love her? Yes, Daniel said firmly. I love Hannah. Not the same way I loved your mother. That was a different time, different people. But what I feel for Hannah is real. She's brought this family back from the edge. She's made us whole again. Mama made us whole, Emily said, tears streaming down her face. And you're replacing her. No, sweetheart. Hannah reached out, then stopped, respecting Emily's space. I could never replace your mother. I don't want to, but your father and your siblings need care, need stability, need someone to help hold this family together. That's what I'm offering. And what are you getting? Noah demanded. What's in this for you? A family, Hannah said simply. A place to belong. A purpose. I know that probably sounds pathetic to you. It doesn't, Caleb interrupted. It sounds lonely, like you were lonely before. Hannah's eyes filled. Yes, I was very lonely. Rosie, who had been unusually quiet, looked up at Hannah. If you marry Papa, will you be my mama? The question froze everyone. Hannah's hand trembled as she touched Rosie's hair. I'll be your stepmother. That means I'll love you and care for you and be here for you, just like I have been. But your real mama, she'll always be your mama. I'm just addition. Extra love, not replacement. Okay, Rosie said with the simple acceptance of childhood. I like extra love. Emily stood abruptly. I need air. She fled the room and they heard the front door slam. Daniel moved to follow, but Hannah stopped him. Let me. She found Emily on the porch, arms wrapped around herself against the spring evening chill. Hannah sat down on the steps beside her, saying nothing. Finally, Emily spoke. It's too soon. I know. People will talk. Yes? They'll say Papa didn't love Mama enough if he's already marrying someone else. Some will. Others will understand that life keeps moving even when we're not ready for it. Hannah was quiet for a moment. Your father loves your mother still. That doesn't end just because she's gone. But Emily, the living need care too, and your father has been trying to care for all of you while drowning in his own grief. And you saved him. We saved each other. I was drifting, alone, purposeless. Your family gave me reason to get up each day. Hannah looked at the darkening sky. I know you're angry. You have every right to be. Your mother should be here. You shouldn't be 13 years old dealing with death and custody battles and your father's hasty remarriage. Then why are you doing this? Because sometimes the right thing and the easy thing aren't the same. And because I truly believe this is what's best for your family. Emily was quiet for a long time. When she spoke again, her voice was small. Will you really love us? Or are we just part of the arrangement? Hannah turned to face her fully. Emily Carter, I have loved you since the day I arrived, and you stood in that barn doorway trying so hard to be brave. I have loved your brothers since Noah first challenged me and Caleb first trusted me with his quietness. I have loved your sister since she first smiled at me, and I have loved your father since he had the courage to admit he needed help. This marriage certificate won't change those feelings. It will just make them legal. Emily's face crumpled, and she fell into Hannah's arms, sobbing. Hannah held her, this girl trying so hard to be a woman, and let her cry out months of grief and fear and exhaustion. I'm so tired, Emily whispered. I know, sweetheart, I know. I don't want to go to Denver. I don't want some fancy aunt who didn't even care enough to visit when Mama died. You won't have to. We'll fight this together. Promise? I promise. The wedding took place 3 days later in the small church where Martha was buried. It was a quiet affair. No celebration, no flowers beyond what grew wild outside. Henderson and his wife stood as witnesses. The minister, who had known Martha, looked troubled but performed the ceremony with dignity. Daniel stood in his Sunday best, feeling like an imposter. Beside him, Hannah wore a simple gray dress she'd sewn herself. No white, no veil, no pretense that this was a traditional celebration. The children sat in the front pew. Emily's face was composed but pale. Noah scowled at the floor. Caleb watched with solemn eyes. And Rosie swung her legs, humming softly to herself. Do you, Daniel Carter, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? Daniel looked at Hannah, at this woman who had saved his family and was now binding herself to their chaos. I do. Do you, Hannah Brooks, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband? Hannah's voice was steady. I do. The ring was Martha's. Daniel had asked Emily's permission, and she'd nodded, unable to speak. Hannah slipped it on with trembling fingers. I now pronounce you husband and wife. There was no kiss, no applause, no joyful tears, just a quiet acknowledgement that they had done what needed doing. At the ranch that evening, Hannah moved her few belongings from the small room off the kitchen to the bedroom Daniel had once shared with Martha. The children watched in silence as she climbed the stairs, a single trunk in her arms. Daniel found her standing in the doorway, staring at the room. I can sleep elsewhere, he said quietly. You can have the room. No. Hannah set down the trunk. We're married now. We should act like it, at least in appearances. The children need to see stability. Hannah, there's a quilt. We can make a line down the middle of the bed if you want. Give us both space until... She trailed off. Until? Until we figure out what this marriage actually is. That night, they lay in the same bed with a careful space between them, both staring at the ceiling. The moon cast silver light through the window, the same moon that had watched over this room for years. Thank you, Daniel said into the darkness, for doing this. Thank you for asking. Hannah, I meant what I said. I love you. She was quiet so long he thought she wouldn't answer. Then, I love you too. But Daniel, love and marriage aren't the same thing. We'll figure out which one we actually have. 2 weeks later, the summons came. The hearing was set for the following Monday in Cheyenne. Adelaide Thornton would present her case, Daniel would present his, and a judge would decide the children's fate. Daniel hired a lawyer from town, Thomas Shaw, a man with more experience in property disputes than custody battles, but the best Daniel could afford. Shaw came to the ranch to prepare, his expression growing more concerned as he reviewed Adelaide's filing. "She's claiming neglect," Shaw said, spreading papers on the kitchen table. "Says the children were found in deplorable conditions, wearing ragged clothes, underfed, and under the care of a man too grief-stricken to provide proper supervision." "That was 6 months ago," Daniel protested, "before Hannah came. And she'll argue that you only hired help because you were incompetent to care for them yourself. That the moment your new wife leaves, the neglect will resume." Shaw looked at Hannah. "Mrs. Carter, they're going to focus on you, the timing of the marriage, your background, your qualifications to mother 4 children." "I understand," Hannah said quietly. "They'll make it seem opportunistic, a woman of modest means marrying a widower for security." "Let them try." Hannah's voice hardened. "I married Daniel because he needed a partner and I needed a family. There's nothing shameful in that." Shaw looked doubtful but nodded. "We'll need character witnesses, people who can testify to the children's well-being, to the household's stability." "Henderson and his wife," Daniel said. "The teacher, Walsh from the general store." "Good. And the children themselves. The judge will likely want to speak with them." Emily, who had been listening from the doorway, stepped forward. "What will we need to say?" "The truth. That you're cared for, educated, happy, that you want to stay with your father." "That's easy," Noah said, appearing beside his sister. "Because it's true." The days before the hearing passed in anxious preparation. Shaw drilled the children on what to expect, how to answer questions, how to stay calm under pressure. Hannah pressed their best clothes, mended every tear, polished every button. Daniel reviewed the ranch accounts, prepared documentation of his income, of the children's care. And at night, he and Hannah lay in their careful separation, both pretending to sleep while worry kept them wakeful. The night before they were to leave for Cheyenne, Daniel found Hannah in the kitchen, unable to rest. She was kneading bread though it was past midnight, working out her fear in the dough. "Can't sleep?" he asked. "Keep thinking about what could go wrong. What if the judge thinks we're frauds? What if Adelaide's lawyers tear apart every argument? What if—" "Hannah." Daniel stilled her hands. "We're going to fight. We're going to tell the truth. And we're going to trust that a judge will see that these children belong here. And if we're wrong, then we'll figure out what comes next, together." She looked up at him, flour dusting her hands, fear and determination warring in her expression. "I'm scared." "So am I. What if I'm not enough? What if marrying me wasn't the right answer?" "You are enough. You've always been enough." Daniel pulled her close, feeling her resist for only a moment before melting into him. "These children love you. I love you. Whatever happens tomorrow, that's real." Hannah's arms came around him, holding tight. They stood there in the dark kitchen, holding each other against the fear of what morning would bring. The ride to Cheyenne took most of the day. They stayed in a modest hotel, the children sharing 2 rooms while Daniel and Hannah took a third. The courthouse loomed over the town square, its stone facade imposing and cold. That evening, Daniel took the children for a walk while Hannah prepared for the next day. When they returned, they found her at the small desk, writing. "What's that?" Emily asked. Hannah looked up, her eyes red. "Letters, to each of you. In case—" Her voice broke. "In case tomorrow doesn't go our way. I wanted you to have something, to remember that you're loved." "Hannah, don't," Daniel said, his throat tight. "Someone has to think about the possibility." She sealed the envelopes, marking each with a child's name. "I'm not being pessimistic, I'm being prepared." That night, Daniel and Hannah abandoned their careful separation. She curled into him, and he held her, both drawing strength from the other's presence. "Whatever happens," she whispered, "I don't regret marrying you." "Neither do I." "Even if we lose?" "Even then." Morning came too soon. They dressed in their finest clothes, Daniel in a suit that felt too tight, Hannah in a deep blue dress that made her look both dignified and vulnerable. The children were scrubbed and pressed and terrified. The courtroom was smaller than Daniel had imagined, wood-paneled and austere. Adelaide Thornton sat on the opposite side, draped in black silk and pearls, her expression one of righteous certainty. Her lawyer was a sharp-faced man from Denver, his briefcase thick with documents. Judge Morrison entered, an older man with steel-gray hair and eyes that gave nothing away. Let's begin. Adelaide's lawyer went first, painting a picture of neglect and incompetence. He described the children's condition 6 months ago: hungry, poorly clothed, grieving without proper support. He brought up Daniel's inability to manage basic household tasks, the burned meals, the chaotic home. And when Mr. Carter finally acknowledged his inadequacy, the lawyer continued, what did he do? He hired unmarried help and allowed her to live in his home. When questions arose about the propriety of such an arrangement, he hastily married this woman, a stranger with no connection to the children, no experience as a mother. Shaw objected, but the damage was done. Adelaide took the stand next, her voice dripping with concern. Those poor children lost their mother and their father couldn't provide even basic care. I'm not saying he doesn't love them. I'm saying love isn't enough when you can't keep them fed and clothed. And you believe you can provide better? The judge asked. I know I can. Education at the finest schools, culture, refinement, opportunity. Everything Martha would have wanted for her children. Mrs. Thornton, when was the last time you saw these children before filing for custody? Adelaide hesitated. At Mr. Carter's wedding, to Martha, 7 years ago. And you've maintained contact with them since? No, but I'm prepared to make up for lost time. Shaw stood for cross-examination. Mrs. Thornton, you claim these children would be better off in your care. Have you asked them what they want? Children don't always know what's best for them. I see. And tell me, in your Denver home, do you have space for 4 children? I have a large house. They would have their own rooms. Their own rooms, Shaw interrupted. Separate. Away from each other. These children who have clung together through grief. You would separate them. For their own development. Mrs. Thornton, have you ever raised children? The courtroom went quiet. Adelaide's face flushed. I was never blessed with that opportunity. So these 4 grieving children would be your first attempt at motherhood. At age 62. After years of no contact with them. Objection, Adelaide's lawyer snapped. Relevance. I'm establishing, Shaw said calmly, that Mrs. Thornton's qualifications as a mother are as questionable as she claims Mr. Carter's are as a father. The difference is these children know and love their father. They're strangers to their great-aunt. The judge made a note. Continue. Shaw called Henderson to the stand, who testified to the ranch's stability, to Daniel's hard work, to the children's improved well-being since Hannah's arrival. The teacher spoke of their educational progress. Walsh confirmed that Daniel paid his bills and provided adequately for his family. But the most powerful moment came when Shaw called Hannah to the stand. She moved forward with quiet dignity, her hands steady as she placed them on the Bible. Mrs. Carter, Shaw began, tell the court how you came to be part of this family. Hannah's voice was clear and calm. I answered an advertisement for a cook. Mr. Carter needed help managing his household after his wife's death. What I found when I arrived was a family in crisis, not from lack of love, but from overwhelming grief and the practical impossibility of one person doing everything. And what did you do? I brought order, not by replacing their mother, but by creating space for them to heal. I taught the children age-appropriate household skills. I established routines. I provided the stability they needed to process their loss. When did you and Mr. Carter decide to marry? When we received Mrs. Thornton's letter threatening custody, we had grown to care for each other over months of working together, raising the children together. The custody threat simply forced us to formalize what was already becoming reality. Adelaide's lawyer stood for cross-examination, his expression predatory. Mrs. Carter, isn't it true that you married Mr. Carter primarily to legitimize your position in his household? I married Mr. Carter because I love him and his children. How convenient that this love became urgent only when custody was threatened. My feelings weren't urgent. The situation was. Hannah's voice remained steady. I would have married Daniel eventually. We simply moved up our timeline. You expect this court to believe? I expect this court, Hannah interrupted, her voice gaining strength, to see that I have cared for those children for months. I've bandaged their scrapes, dried their tears, celebrated their victories, and held them through their nightmares. I've taught them to cook and clean and manage a household. I've made sure they're fed and clothed and educated. I've loved them. That doesn't require a marriage certificate, but having one doesn't make it less real. The lawyer tried another angle. You're aware that accepting money for household work is employment, not motherhood? I'm aware that caring for children you love is motherhood, regardless of how it began. Hannah looked directly at the judge. Your Honor, I didn't give birth to those children, but I have mothered them, and I will continue to do so whether this court recognizes my right to or not. The courtroom was silent. The judge made another note. Finally, it was time for the children themselves. The judge called them into his chambers, a less formal setting, he said, where they could speak freely. Daniel and Hannah waited in the courtroom, holding hands so tightly their fingers went numb. Adelaide sat rigid, her lawyer whispering in her ear. 45 minutes passed. An hour. Finally, the judge emerged, the children trailing behind him. Emily's face was tear-stained. Noah looked defiant. Caleb seemed smaller somehow. And Rosie held a handkerchief, clutching it like a lifeline. They returned to their seats, and the judge stood at his bench. I've heard testimony from both sides. I've reviewed the documentation, and I've spoken at length with the children at the center of this dispute. He looked at Adelaide, then at Daniel. This is not an easy decision. Both parties clearly want what they believe is best for these children. Daniel's heart hammered in his chest. Beside him, Hannah had gone very still. However, the judge continued, this court must consider not just material advantage, but emotional well-being, stability, love, belonging. He picked up several pieces of paper. The children wrote letters. At Mrs. Carter's suggestion, I understand. I'd like to read portions of them. Daniel's breath caught. The letters Hannah had helped them write. The judge began with Emily's. His voice was measured as he read her words about loss and healing, about Hannah's patience and her father's love, about not wanting to leave the only home she'd ever known. Then Noah's letter, shorter but fierce, about belonging to the ranch and his family, about not needing fancy schools when he had everything that mattered right here. Caleb's was quietest, but perhaps most powerful. A simple statement that Hannah made him feel safe, and his father made him feel loved, and please don't take him away from that. And finally, Rosie's, dictated to Hannah and written in a careful hand. My first mama is in heaven. My second mama is here. I need them both. Please don't take me away from Hannah. By the time the judge finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the courtroom, except Adelaide's, though her face had gone pale. These letters, the judge said, demonstrate children who are loved, who are cared for, who have found healing and stability in their current home. Mrs. Thornton, I do not doubt your good intentions or your ability to provide material advantages. But these children do not need advantages. They need what they already have, a father who loves them, a stepmother who has earned their trust and affection, and a home where they belong. Adelaide stood. Your Honor, I must object. Your objection is noted and overruled. The petition for custody is denied. These children will remain with their father. He looked at Daniel. Mr. Carter, I'm granting you full custody with the understanding that should conditions change significantly, should the household again fall into the chaos described in earlier testimony, this matter can be revisited. Understood, Your Honor. Thank you. Don't thank me. Thank your wife and children. They made this case far more eloquently than any lawyer could. The judge gathered his papers. We're adjourned. The courtroom erupted. Daniel pulled Hannah into his arms as the children rushed forward, all of them crying and laughing at once. Adelaide swept from the room, her lawyer trailing behind, already discussing appeals that would go nowhere. Shaw shook Daniel's hand. Congratulations. Though I have to say it was Mrs. Carter and the children who won this case. That night, in the hotel room, after the children were finally asleep and the adrenaline had faded, Daniel and Hannah lay in bed, both still in their court clothes, too exhausted to change. We won, Hannah whispered, as if saying it too loud might make it untrue. You won. Those letters. Hannah, that was brilliant. It was honest. The children wrote what they felt. Because you taught them it was okay to feel it. Daniel rolled to face her. You saved us. Again. Hannah's eyes filled with tears. I was so scared. So was I. When the judge started reading Emily's letter, I thought my heart would stop. When Rosie called you her second mama, Daniel's voice broke. Hannah, I know we agreed to revisit this marriage in a year to see if it's real, but I already know. This is real. You're real. Everything I feel for you is real. Hannah touched his face, her fingers gentle. I know, I feel it too. Then why wait? Why give ourselves an escape clause? Because I needed to know you wanted me, not just needed me, and now I do. She smiled, tears streaming down her face. Daniel Carter, I choose this marriage. I choose this family. I choose you. He kissed her then, properly and thoroughly, and she kissed him back with equal fervor. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Hannah laughed. What? Daniel asked. I just realized we've been married for 2 weeks, and that was our first real kiss. Then we have a lot of catching up to do. Yes, Hannah agreed, pulling him close again. Yes, we do. The journey home from Cheyenne felt different than the tense ride there. The wagon rolled through the Wyoming landscape under a sky so vast and blue, it seemed impossible that anything bad could exist beneath it. The children chattered in the back, their relief expressing itself in noise and laughter, and the occasional argument that actually sounded normal instead of strained. Daniel held the reins with one hand, the other resting on the seat between him and Hannah. She'd placed her hand there too, and their fingers had intertwined without conscious decision. It was a small gesture, but it felt monumental, the first public claim of their marriage as something real rather than strategic. Papa, Emily called from the back, can we stop at Morrison Creek? I want to show Hannah where Mama used to take us for picnics. Daniel felt Hannah's hand tense in his, but her voice was calm when she answered. I'd like that very much. They stopped at the creek, a ribbon of silver water cutting through cottonwoods that were just beginning to leaf out in pale green. The children scattered immediately, Noah and Caleb skipping stones while Emily helped Rosie hunt for interesting pebbles along the shore. Hannah stood watching them, her expression unreadable. Daniel moved beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. She brought them here on Sunday afternoons in summer, he said quietly. Martha. She'd pack a basket and we'd spend hours just being a family. You don't have to tell me this. I want to. Hannah, you're not erasing Martha by being here. You're honoring what she started by helping it continue. Emily approached, holding a smooth gray stone. Mama always looked for heart-shaped rocks. She said they were good luck. She turned the stone over in her palm, then held it out to Hannah. I think you should have this one. Hannah took the stone with trembling fingers. Emily, you're not Mama, Emily said, her voice steady despite the tears on her cheeks. You'll never be Mama. But you fought for us in that courtroom. You stood up to that awful woman and her fancy lawyers. Her voice broke. You love us. I can see it. And maybe that's enough. Maybe that's more than enough. Hannah pulled Emily into a fierce embrace, both of them crying now. Daniel watched his daughter, too old for her years but finally allowing herself to be young again, cling to the woman who had become her stepmother, and felt something settle in his chest that had been unsettled for far too long. When they finally returned home, the ranch looked different somehow. The same buildings, same fences, same weathered barn, but now it felt like a place they'd defended and won back, a home they'd chosen rather than simply inherited. Henderson was waiting in the yard, his wife Mary beside him. The moment the wagon stopped, Mary rushed forward. We heard from Walsh, who heard from someone at the courthouse. Daniel, is it true? The judge ruled in your favor? It's true. Daniel helped Hannah down from the wagon, keeping his hand on her waist. The children stay. Mary's eyes filled with tears. Thank the heavens. We've been beside ourselves with worry. She turned to Hannah. And you, my dear, Walsh said you were magnificent on the stand. Walsh exaggerates. I doubt that very much. Mary took Hannah's hands. I know we haven't been as welcoming as we should have been. The circumstances were unusual, and people talked, and, well, I'm ashamed to say I listened to gossip rather than seeing the truth, but after hearing what happened in that courtroom, how you fought for these children, Hannah, I hope you'll forgive our coldness and allow me to be a friend. Hannah's composure wavered. I would like that very much. The next weeks brought a shift in the household's rhythm. With the custody threat behind them, a tension that had been thrumming beneath everything finally released. The children's laughter came easier. Arguments over chores felt normal rather than fraught. And Daniel and Hannah began to navigate their marriage not as a strategic necessity, but as an actual partnership. It wasn't always smooth. One evening, Daniel came in from a grueling day mending fence in the far pasture to find Hannah snapping at Caleb over some minor infraction involving spilled flour. The boy's face had crumpled, and Hannah immediately looked stricken. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice tight. "I'm so sorry, Caleb. That was too harsh." But Caleb had already fled upstairs. Hannah sank into a chair, her head in her hands. "I don't know what I'm doing," she said when Daniel approached. "I've been running this household for months, but being a mother, an actual mother, it's different. I can't just be the cook and housekeeper anymore. They need more than that, and I don't know if I can give it." Daniel crouched beside her chair. "You've been giving it all along. One moment of impatience doesn't erase months of love. But what if I fail them? What if the judge was wrong to leave them here, and I'm not enough? And, Hannah." Daniel waited until she looked at him. "You're going to make mistakes. So am I. So will the children. That's what families do. But you know what else families do? They forgive. They adapt. They keep trying." "How do you know?" "Because that's what Martha would say. And she was usually right about these things." Hannah's laugh was watery. "I wish I'd known her. You would have liked each other. She was practical like you. Strong. Didn't suffer nonsense." Daniel stood, offering his hand. "Come on, let's go talk to Caleb together. Show him that making mistakes and apologizing for them is what grown-ups do." They found Caleb in the room he shared with Noah, curled on his bed with a book he wasn't reading. When they entered, he looked up with wary eyes. "I'm sorry," Hannah said, sitting on the edge of the bed. "I was tired and frustrated, and I took it out on you. That wasn't fair." "It's okay," Caleb mumbled. "No, it's not. You made a mistake with the flour. Accidents happen. But I made a bigger mistake by responding with anger instead of patience." She touched his hand. "Can you forgive me?" Caleb was quiet for a moment, then nodded. "Can I ask you something?" "Anything. Are you going to leave now that the court case is over and you don't have to stay?" The question hit like a physical blow. Hannah's eyes widened. "What? No. Caleb, why would you think that?" "Because you married Papa to help us keep our family. But now we're safe. So maybe you don't need to be married anymore." Hannah looked at Daniel, her expression helpless. He sat on the other side of Caleb, the three of them arranged on the narrow bed. "Caleb," Daniel said carefully, "it's true that we married quickly because of the custody case. But son, that's not why we're staying married. We're staying married because we want to be, because Hannah belongs in this family now, and leaving would hurt all of us, including her." "Really?" Caleb looked at Hannah. "You want to stay?" "More than anything." Hannah's voice was fierce. "Caleb, you and your siblings and your father, you're my family now. The family I chose, and I'm not going anywhere." Caleb threw his arms around her, and Hannah held him tight, her eyes meeting Daniel's over the boy's head. In that look was everything they'd been dancing around for weeks, the acknowledgement that this marriage, born of necessity, had become something neither of them wanted to lose. As spring deepened into summer, the ranch flourished. The cattle fattened on new grass. The garden Hannah had planted began producing vegetables. The children grew brown from sun and strong from work that was appropriate to their ages rather than born of desperation. And Daniel and Hannah grew into their marriage in increments, shared glances across the dinner table, hands finding each other during evening walks, conversations that stretched long into the night. The careful space they'd maintained in their bed slowly disappeared until Hannah woke most mornings tucked against Daniel's chest, his arm around her waist. One evening in late June, Daniel came in from the barn to find the kitchen empty, which was unusual. Hannah was always there at this hour, starting dinner preparations. He heard voices from upstairs, Hannah's low murmur and Emily's higher pitch. Curious, he climbed the stairs quietly. Emily's door was ajar, and through it he could see his daughter standing on a stool while Hannah pinned up the hem of a new dress. "Hold still," Hannah said, pins between her lips. "Almost done." "It's too fancy," Emily protested, but her face was flushed with pleasure. "I'll have nowhere to wear it." "Nonsense. The church social is next month. You'll wear it there and be the prettiest girl present. Hannah, can I ask you something? Mm-hmm. Do you think Mama would be angry about you being here? Hannah removed the pins from her mouth, her hands stilling. I think your mama would want you to be happy and loved and cared for. I think she'd want your father to have a partner in raising you. And I hope, she'd be grateful that someone loves you all as much as I do. Emily was quiet for a moment. I'm glad Papa married you, even though it was so soon after your mama's death. Especially because of that. Papa was drowning, Hannah. We all were. You threw us a rope. Emily looked down at her new dress. I know some people in town still talk. Mrs. Morrison told Mary Henderson it was scandalous how fast Papa moved on. But they don't know what it was like here before you came. Your father loved your mother very much. I know. And he loves you differently, but just as much. I can see it in how he looks at you. Emily smiled. It's okay, you know, for both things to be true. Daniel backed away from the door before he could be caught eavesdropping, his throat tight with emotion. His daughter, his wise, resilient daughter, had just given Hannah the blessing she'd been seeking without ever asking for it. That night, after the children were asleep, Daniel found Hannah on the porch. The summer air was warm and thick with the scent of sage and hay. She sat on the steps, her head tilted back to watch the stars emerge. Room for one more? He asked. She patted the step beside her, and he sat close enough that their shoulders touched. For a while they just sat in comfortable silence, watching the sky darken and the first stars appear. I heard you with Emily earlier, Daniel admitted. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but it's all right. Hannah leaned her head on his shoulder. She asked if Martha would be angry about me being here. What did you really think when she asked that? Hannah was quiet for a long moment. Honestly, I hope that wherever Martha is, she can see that her children are loved, that her husband isn't alone anymore, that the family she built didn't fall apart after she left it. She lifted her head to look at him. Does that sound presumptuous? Me hoping for her approval? It sounds like you understand that love doesn't end just because life does. Daniel took her hand. Martha would approve of you, Hannah. I'm certain of that. How can you be certain? Because she always said that family was about showing up day after day, doing the work even when it's hard. That's what you do. That's who you are. He brought her hand to his lips. You showed up for us when we needed it most. You're still showing up. Martha would respect that. Hannah's eyes shone in the starlight. I love you, Daniel Carter. I don't know when it happened. Maybe that first day when you were standing in your disaster of a kitchen looking so lost. Maybe later when I saw you with the children. Maybe in that courtroom when we fought together. But I love you. I love you too. Have since before I knew it was happening. He pulled her close and she came willingly, tucking herself against him. We should probably go inside. Probably. But neither of them moved, content to sit in the warm darkness, holding each other. The summer brought its share of challenges. A dry spell in July had Daniel worried about water for the cattle. Noah fell from a horse and broke his arm, sending Hannah into a panic that revealed how deep her attachment had grown. Rosie came down with a fever that had them both sitting up for 2 nights straight, taking turns sponging her forehead with cool water. But it also brought moments of pure joy. Caleb's first successful bread loaf, baked entirely by himself with Hannah supervising. Emily's face when a boy at the church social asked her to dance. Noah's grudging admission that having a stepmother who could set his broken arm properly and tell him to stop being a baby in the same breath was actually pretty useful. And for Daniel and Hannah, it brought the quiet building of intimacy, the inside jokes, the shared responsibilities, the way Hannah anticipated what he needed before he asked, the way he knew when she was overwhelmed and needed space. One afternoon in August, Daniel came in early from the fields, driven inside by heat that shimmered off the ground in visible waves. He found Hannah in the kitchen, teaching all 4 children to make pie. Flour dusted every surface. Rosie had it in her hair. Noah was arguing with Caleb about the proper way to crimp edges, and Emily was rolling out dough with intense concentration while Hannah supervised. You're making a mess of my kitchen, he observed. Hannah looked up, her face flushed from the heat of the stove, a smudge of flour on her cheek. Your kitchen? I seem to recall you being banned from cooking here. Fair point. Our kitchen, then. Better. She wiped her hands on her apron. We're making pies for the harvest celebration next week. The children thought we should contribute. How many pies? 8, Noah announced proudly. Apple, cherry, and 2 peach. That's only 7. The 8th is experimental, Caleb said. Hannah's letting me try a recipe with berries and honey. Daniel leaned against the doorframe, watching his family work together with an ease that would have been impossible 6 months ago. This was what Hannah had built. Not just an organized household, but a place where children could make messes and try experiments and argue about pie crimping. What? Hannah asked, noticing his stare. Just thinking about how far we've come. We've come far, or the kitchen has come far? Both. He crossed to her, ignoring the children's giggles, and kissed her soundly despite the flour and the heat and the audience. Thank you. For what? For saving us. For loving us. For being exactly what we needed. Emily made a gagging sound. Papa, we're trying to work here. Yeah, Noah added, but he was grinning. Save the mushy stuff for when we're not around. Noted. Daniel released Hannah, who was blushing. I'll be in the barn if anyone needs me. As he headed for the door, he heard Rosie's voice, clear and certain. I like when Papa kisses Hannah. It means he's happy. Me too, sweetheart, Hannah replied softly. Me too. The harvest celebration came on a Saturday in late August, the whole community gathering at the church grounds for food, music, and dancing. Hannah had been anxious about it, their first public appearance as a married couple at a social event, where people would watch and judge and compare her to Martha. But as they arrived, Mary Henderson swept forward immediately, linking her arm through Hannah's. Come on, dear, the women are setting up the food tables, and I want everyone to see these gorgeous pies your children made. The emphasis on your children was deliberate and kind, and Hannah shot Mary a grateful look. The afternoon passed in a blur of activity. The children ran wild with the other ranch kids, their laughter carrying across the grounds. Daniel found himself in a group of men discussing cattle prices and water rights, but his eyes kept finding Hannah across the crowd. She was surrounded by women now, Mary, the teacher, several others, all of them talking and laughing. Henderson noticed Daniel's distraction. She's fitting in well. Better than I expected. People were skeptical at first, Henderson admitted. The timing seemed suspicious, but then word spread about the custody hearing, about how she fought for your children, changed a lot of minds. She has a way of doing that. Martha would be glad, Henderson said quietly, that you found someone, that the children have a mother again. Daniel felt the familiar ache of loss, but it was softer now, coexisting with the joy of what he'd found. Yeah, she would. As the sun began to set, the music started. A fiddler and a guitarist playing familiar tunes. Couples moved onto the makeshift dance floor, and Daniel made his way to Hannah. Dance with me, he said, offering his hand. She hesitated. Daniel, I'm not much of a dancer. Neither am I. We'll be terrible together. She laughed and let him pull her onto the floor. He was right. They were both clumsy, stepping on each other's toes and losing the rhythm. But her hand was warm in his, and when she looked up at him, her eyes were shining with happiness. People are watching, she murmured. Let them watch. Let them see that I'm proud to have you as my wife. Even though I just stepped on your foot again? Especially because of that. He spun her, nearly causing both of them to stumble, and her laugh rang out clear and bright. Emily appeared beside them, Noah in tow. Papa, you're embarrassing us. That's my job as a father. Hannah, make him stop. I can't make your father do anything. You should know that by now. But Hannah was grinning. As the evening wore on and the children's energy finally flagged, they loaded into the wagon for the ride home. Rosie was already asleep in Hannah's lap. Caleb dozed against Emily's shoulder. Noah fought to keep his eyes open, determined not to miss anything. Today was good, Emily said quietly. It was, Hannah agreed, stroking Rosie's hair. People were nice to you. They were. Does that mean they've accepted us? You and Papa being married? Hannah considered the question. I think people are beginning to see that our family works, regardless of how it came together. Some will always judge. That's human nature. But the people who matter, the ones who care about you children and your father, they see the truth. What's the truth? That love can happen in unexpected ways. that families can be rebuilt after loss, that sometimes the best things in life come from the worst circumstances. Daniel reached over and squeezed Hannah's shoulder, and she leaned into the touch. In the wagon bed, Noah finally surrendered to sleep, and Emily soon followed. The horses knew the way home, following the familiar road under a sky brilliant with stars. When they arrived, Daniel carried Rosie to bed while Hannah roused the others enough to get them upstairs. They moved through the nighttime routine with the ease of long practice, checking windows, banking the fire, locking doors. In their room, Hannah sat at the small vanity, taking down her hair. Daniel watched from the bed, still amazed sometimes that this was his life now, this woman in his room, in his bed, in his heart. "What are you thinking?" she asked, catching his eye in the mirror. "That I'm grateful for everything that brought you here, even the hard things." She turned to face him. "Even Adelaide's custody claim?" "Even that, because it forced me to admit what I'd been feeling. Made me fight for what I wanted instead of just accepting what I had." Hannah crossed to the bed, settling beside him. "Daniel, can I tell you something?" "Anything." "When I first came here, I thought this would be a job, a position, something I'd do for a year or two before moving on to the next thing." She took his hand. "I never imagined I'd find a family, that 4 children would become my children, that a grieving widower would become the man I can't imagine living without." "You don't have to imagine it. I'm not going anywhere." "Neither am I." She kissed him softly. "This is my home now. You're my home." They lay down together, Hannah tucked against Daniel's side, his arm around her. Through the open window came the sounds of summer night, crickets, distant cattle, the whisper of wind through grass. "Hannah?" "Thank you for saying yes." "To marrying you?" "To everything. To the job, to staying, to loving us even when we were a mess." She propped herself up on one elbow, looking down at him in the moonlight. "Daniel Carter, you hired a cook. But what you got was a wife, a mother for your children, and a partner in building a life. I think I should be thanking you. Then we'll call it even. Deal." She settled back against him, and he felt her smile against his shoulder. "Though, for the record, I'm getting the better end of this bargain. Not even close." They drifted towards sleep, holding each other in the home they'd defended and the marriage they'd built. Outside, the Wyoming night stretched vast and starlit over the ranch where a family had been broken and was now, finally, whole again. The next morning brought Sunday, which meant church and the dinner that followed. Hannah rose early, as always, but this time Daniel rose with her. Together they prepared breakfast, moving around each other in the kitchen with the choreography of familiarity. "You don't have to help," Hannah said as Daniel cracked eggs into a bowl. "I can manage." "I know you can, but we're partners, remember? Sometimes that means sharing the work." She smiled, that small expression he'd come to treasure. "All right then. Partners." The children came down one by one, drawn by the smell of bacon and fresh biscuits. They ate together, laughing over Noah's story about the previous night's dance and Emily's blushing admission that the Hendersons' oldest son had asked to walk her home from the next social. "Absolutely not," Daniel said automatically. "Papa!" "He's 17, Emily. You're barely 14. "Almost 14, she corrected. "And we'd be walking, not getting married." Hannah hid her smile behind her coffee cup. "Perhaps a compromise? He can walk you home if your father and I are also walking home with you." Emily groaned, but she was smiling. "Fine. That's mortifying, but fine." Church was peaceful, the familiar hymns and prayers washing over Daniel with comfort rather than pain for the first time since Martha's death. Hannah sat beside him, Rosie on her lap, and when it came time for the prayer of thanksgiving, Daniel found he had more to be grateful for than he'd had in a long time. After the service, as people milled about outside, old Mrs. Patterson approached Hannah. She was known as the town gossip, her opinions carrying weight whether wanted or not. "Mrs. Carter," she said, and Hannah stiffened slightly. "I wanted to tell you that those pies your family brought to the celebration were exceptional. And I saw how you've raised those children, polite, hardworking, well-dressed. You've done well by them." Hannah blinked in surprise. "Thank you, Mrs. Patterson. I'll admit I had my doubts when I heard about the hasty marriage. But seeing you and Daniel together, seeing those children thrive, well, it's clear you belong in this family." She patted Hannah's hand. Welcome to our community, dear. Properly welcomed, I mean. As Mrs. Patterson walked away, Mary appeared at Hannah's elbow. Well, if Mrs. Patterson approves, the whole town will follow suit. You've officially arrived. Hannah let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. I didn't realize I needed her approval. You didn't, but it helps. Mary linked arms with her. Come on, let's get to my house for dinner before the men eat all the roast. The meal at the Hendersons was loud and chaotic, children running underfoot while the adults talked and laughed. Daniel watched Hannah fit seamlessly into the conversation, her earlier nervousness evaporating as Mary and the other women treated her as one of their own. On the ride home, with the children drowsy in the back of the wagon, Emily spoke up. Today was good. It was, Daniel agreed. People weren't staring at us anymore, at you and Hannah. No, they weren't. Does that mean things are normal now? Hannah turned to look at Emily. What's normal? I don't know, just regular. Not the family everyone gossips about. I think we're becoming that, Hannah said. It takes time for people to adjust to change, but we're getting there. Good. Emily was quiet for a moment. I like being normal. Daniel reached over and took Hannah's hand, and she squeezed back. Normal. Such a simple word for something that had felt impossible 6 months ago. But here they were. A family that worked, a marriage that thrived, a home filled with love instead of grief. As they pulled into the ranch yard, the setting sun painted the buildings in shades of gold and amber. The barn Daniel had built with Martha, the house where they'd raised their children, the land they'd carved out of wilderness. But now it was also Hannah's barn, Hannah's house, Hannah's land. Not because she'd replaced Martha, but because she'd become part of the story. A new chapter that honored what came before while building something new. That night, tucked into bed with Hannah warm beside him, and his children safe down the hall, Daniel let himself acknowledge the fullness of his gratitude. For the woman who'd answered his advertisement, for the courage to ask her to stay, for the love that had grown in the spaces between necessity and choice. I can hear you thinking, Hannah murmured, just counting blessings. Find any? More than I can count. He pulled her closer. You chief among them. She tilted her face up for a kiss, which he gave gladly. Outside, the night settled over the ranch, their home, their life. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. Cattle to tend, children to raise, a household to run, but they would face it together, this cook who had become a wife, this widower who had learned to love again, and the 4 children who bound them together. A family rebuilt, a marriage chosen, a home made whole. September arrived with the first whisper of autumn, the mornings sharp enough to frost the grass and the evenings cooling fast once the sun disappeared behind the mountains. Daniel woke one morning to find Hannah already dressed, standing at the bedroom window watching the dawn break over the eastern pasture. Couldn't sleep? He asked, his voice rough with mourning. She turned, her expression distant. I was thinking about Emily. What about her? She's growing up so fast. In another few years, she'll be thinking about marriage, leaving home. And the boys, they'll want their own lives eventually. Even Rosie won't be small forever. Hannah wrapped her arms around herself. What happens when they don't need us anymore? Daniel rose and crossed to her, pulling her back against his chest. Then we'll have each other. That's what happens. Is that enough? The question caught him off guard. Isn't it? Hannah turned in his arms, her eyes searching his face. Daniel, I love you. I love this life we've built. But sometimes I wonder if you only needed me because the children needed me. What happens when that's no longer true? Hannah Brooks Carter, you listen to me. He cupped her face in his hands. I fell in love with you watching you knead bread at midnight because you were too worried to sleep. I fell in love with you when you stood up to Adelaide's lawyers with that fire in your eyes. I fell in love with you in 1,000 moments that had nothing to do with the children and everything to do with who you are. He kissed her forehead. When the children are grown and gone, I'll still wake up wanting to see your face. That's what happens. She softened against him, her arms coming around his waist. Promise? Promise. Downstairs, they found an unexpected crisis brewing. Emily sat at the kitchen table, her face blotchy from crying, while Noah paced like a caged animal. Caleb stood by the window, his usual quiet replaced with visible agitation. "What happened?" Daniel demanded. "Mrs. Patterson happened," Noah spat. "That old busybody went to the school board." Hannah's hand tightened on Daniel's arm. "What did she do?" Emily looked up, fresh tears spilling over. "She said it wasn't proper for us to be taught by Miss Winters anymore, that we need a male teacher for the boys, and that I should be learning from a married woman about domestic duties, not wasting time on books." "That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard," Noah said, his voice rising. "Miss Winters is the best teacher in 3 counties. She's teaching Caleb mathematics that would challenge men twice his age, and Emily's reading Shakespeare." "Noah, calm down," Hannah said, though her own face had gone pale. "When did this happen?" "Yesterday. Mrs. Patterson convinced 2 other mothers to sign a petition. They're presenting it to the school board tomorrow." Emily wiped her eyes. "Miss Winters told us today that she might have to resign. She said she can't fight the whole community." Daniel felt rage building in his chest. "Like hell she can't." "Daniel," Hannah warned, but her eyes held the same fire he felt. "No. I'm not letting a bunch of small-minded gossips destroy something good because they have outdated ideas about education." He grabbed his hat from the peg. "I'm going to town." "Not alone, you're not." Hannah was already untying her apron. "Emily, watch your brothers and sister. Your father and I have business in town." The school board met in the room behind the general store, 5 men who looked decidedly uncomfortable with the petition before them. Mrs. Patterson sat in the corner, her expression smug. When Daniel and Hannah entered, her smile faltered. "Mr. Carter, Mrs. Carter, this is a closed meeting." "My children's education is being discussed," Daniel interrupted. "That makes it my business." Board Chairman Robert Walsh cleared his throat. "Daniel, we're just reviewing concerns that have been raised about the appropriateness of Miss Winters continuing as the teacher." "What concerns? That she's unmarried? That she's a woman? That she actually teaches children to think instead of just memorizing scripture?" "Now see here," Mrs. Patterson began. "No, you see here." Daniel's voice cut across hers like a blade. 6 months ago, my children were drowning. They'd lost their mother, and I was failing them in every way that mattered. Miss Winters kept teaching them when I couldn't even keep them fed. She gave them structure, knowledge, something to hold on to when everything else was falling apart. Hannah stepped forward. "Mrs. Patterson, you told me just last week that my children were well-raised, polite, hardworking. Where do you think they learned those things? From Miss Winters, who taught them not just reading and arithmetic, but responsibility and curiosity and the value of education." "That's all well and good," Mrs. Patterson said, her voice tight. "But it's not proper for a young unmarried woman to be teaching adolescent boys. There should be a man—" "Why?" Hannah's question was sharp. "Because men are inherently better teachers, or because you're uncomfortable with the idea of an educated, independent woman having authority?" The room went silent. Walsh shifted uncomfortably. "Mrs. Carter, no one is questioning Miss Winters' capability." "Then what are you questioning?" Daniel demanded. "Because it sounds to me like you're questioning her character based on nothing but the fact that she's 30 years old and hasn't married." "There's been talk," another board member said reluctantly, "about her receiving gentlemen callers at the boarding house." "You mean her brother?" Hannah's voice could have cut glass. "Her widowed brother who visits from Laramie once a month? That gentleman caller?" Mrs. Patterson's face flushed. "I didn't know." "No, you didn't, because you were too busy spreading gossip to bother with facts." Hannah turned to the board. "Gentlemen, I understand that change makes people uncomfortable. I understand that some folks in this town still haven't accepted that a woman can run her own household, manage finances, make decisions. But that discomfort doesn't give anyone the right to destroy a good woman's livelihood because she doesn't fit into a narrow idea of what women should be." "Mrs. Carter has a point," Walsh said slowly. "Miss Winters has been teaching here for 5 years without a single complaint until now." "Because now people are looking for things to criticize," Daniel said. "And you know why? Because my wife showed up and proved that women can be competent, strong, and independent. That threatens people who prefer women to be meek and manageable." Mrs. Patterson stood, her face mottled with anger. "This is outrageous. I came here with legitimate concerns." You came here with prejudice dressed up as concern, Hannah said quietly. And I understand why. Change is frightening, but Mrs. Patterson, the world is changing whether we like it or not. Our daughters need to be educated, not just trained to keep house. Our sons need to be taught by people who value learning over gender. And our community needs to decide if it's going to move forward or cling to ideas that no longer serve us. The board members looked at each other, having a silent conversation. Finally, Walsh spoke. I propose we table this petition pending further review. In the meantime, Miss Winters continues teaching unless we receive specific, factual complaints about her conduct. That's not, Mrs. Patterson sputtered. That's my motion, Walsh said firmly. All in favor? 4 hands rose. The 5th board member, clearly intimidated by Mrs. Patterson's glare, reluctantly added his vote. Motion carries. Meeting adjourned. Outside, Daniel and Hannah stood in the afternoon sun, both still trembling with adrenaline. Hannah let out a shaky laugh. Did we just do that? We just did that. Daniel pulled her into his arms, not caring who saw. You were magnificent. I was terrified. You didn't show it. He kissed her soundly, then pulled back, grinning. Though I think you just made an enemy of Mrs. Patterson. I think I already had. At least now it's for a good reason. They rode home to find the children anxiously waiting. When Daniel and Hannah explained what had happened, Emily burst into tears of relief. Noah whooped and punched the air. Even Caleb smiled, a rare full expression of joy. You saved Miss Winters, Emily said, throwing her arms around Hannah. You saved our school. We fought for something worth fighting for, Hannah corrected. But Emily, you need to understand something. There will always be people who think women shouldn't be educated, shouldn't have opportunities, shouldn't make their own choices. You'll face that your whole life. What do I do about it? You prove them wrong. You learn everything you can from Miss Winters. You read those books. Study that mathematics. Develop that sharp mind. And when someone tells you that you can't do something because you're a woman, you do it anyway, and do it brilliantly. Emily nodded, her face fierce with determination. I will. That evening, after the children were in bed, Daniel found Hannah in the kitchen, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea that had long since gone cold. He sat beside her, waiting. I was like Emily once, she said finally. Young, eager to learn, convinced I could do anything. My father encouraged me. He believed women should be educated. But after he died, my mother had different ideas. She said education wouldn't help me catch a husband, that I should focus on domestic skills. But you didn't. I did, actually, for years. I learned to cook, to sew, to manage a household. I became exactly what society expected. She set down her cup. And I was miserable. It wasn't until I came west that I realized I could choose differently. I could be competent and useful and valued for my skills, not just my marriageability. And then you met a widower who was burning breakfast and desperately needed exactly those skills. Hannah laughed. Yes, but Daniel, don't you see? If I'd listened to all the people who said I should be content with just being someone's wife, I never would have had the courage to answer your advertisement. I never would have found this life. I'm grateful you didn't listen. So am I. But it makes me wonder how many women are out there right now being told to limit themselves, to shrink their dreams to fit someone else's idea of propriety? How many girls like Emily are going to have their education cut short because people like Mrs. Patterson think books and arithmetic are wasted on women? Daniel took her hand. You can't save everyone, Hannah. I know, but maybe I can save a few, starting with our daughter. The next weeks brought subtle shifts in the community dynamics. Mrs. Patterson remained frosty, but her influence had waned. Other women, younger ones or those with daughters, began seeking Hannah's company, asking her opinions on education, on household management, on balancing traditional roles with personal ambition. Mary Henderson confided one afternoon, as she and Hannah worked on preserving the last of the summer vegetables, that she'd never finished learning to read. My father said it wasn't necessary for a farmer's daughter. I always wondered what was in all those books my brother got to read. It's not too late, Hannah said. If you want to learn, I could teach you. Mary's eyes filled with tears. You would do that? Of course. Bring your children when you come. Emily can watch them while we work. Within a month, 3 other women had joined them. They met twice a week in Hannah's kitchen, practicing letters and sounding out words while children played in the yard. Daniel would come in from the fields to find his home full of women's voices, reading haltingly from primers or the Bible, celebrating small victories. "You're starting a revolution," he told Hannah one evening. "I'm teaching women to read. That's hardly revolutionary. In this town, it absolutely is." He watched her prepare dinner, moving through the kitchen with unconscious grace. "You know they're calling you the reading lady?" Hannah laughed. "That's ridiculous." "It's true. Henderson told me. His wife goes home and practices her letters every night. She's determined to read the newspaper to him by Christmas." "That's wonderful." "It is. But Hannah, you need to be careful. Not everyone appreciates what you're doing." "You mean Mrs. Patterson?" "And others. Change threatens people. You're threatening their comfortable assumptions about how things should be." Hannah set down her knife, her expression turning serious. "Daniel, I can't live my life afraid of threatening people's assumptions. I won't shrink myself to make others comfortable." "I'm not asking you to. I'm just asking you to be aware that there might be consequences." The consequences came sooner than expected. 2 weeks later, the town's minister appeared at their door. Reverend Thompson was a kindly man in his 60s, generally well-liked, but deeply traditional in his views. "Mr. Carter, Mrs. Carter, I wonder if I might have a word." They invited him in, and Hannah served coffee while Daniel waited for the real purpose of the visit to emerge. "I've heard about your reading lessons," Thompson began, addressing Hannah. "Some of the church ladies have expressed concern." "Concern about women learning to read?" Hannah's tone was carefully neutral. "Concern about the tone of the lessons. I'm told you encourage women to read beyond scripture. Novels, newspapers, even political writings." "I encourage them to read whatever interests them, yes." Thompson shifted uncomfortably. "Mrs. Carter, I don't want to seem critical. Your heart is clearly in the right place, but there's a natural order to things. Men are called to lead, to engage with the world. Women are called to support, to nurture, to create peaceful homes. And reading prevents women from doing that? Reading the wrong things can give women ideas that lead them away from their proper roles." Hannah set down her coffee cup with deliberate care. "Reverend Thompson, with all due respect, I don't believe literacy has a gender. The ability to read scripture, to educate one's children, to understand the world, these aren't masculine or feminine traits. They're human traits. But surely you agree that men and women have different roles, different experiences, perhaps. Different expectations, certainly, but different capacities for learning? No, I don't agree with that at all." Thompson looked to Daniel for support. "Mr. Carter, surely you see the wisdom in maintaining traditional structures. Your wife is an excellent example of womanly virtue. She keeps a beautiful home, raises your children well, supports your work. Why encourage other women to step outside their natural sphere?" Daniel felt Hannah tense beside him. He chose his words carefully. "Reverend, my wife is many things. She's an excellent cook, yes. She manages our household beautifully. But she's also the smartest person I know. She stood up to lawyers in a courtroom and won custody of my children when I was too scared to speak. She taught my daughter that intelligence is nothing to be ashamed of. She's building a life that's bigger than just supporting mine, and our family is stronger for it. I'm not suggesting your wife is unintelligent. No, you're suggesting she should hide that intelligence to make other people comfortable, and I'm telling you that's not going to happen." Daniel reached for Hannah's hand. "My wife can teach women to read without my permission because she doesn't need my permission. She's not my property or my subordinate. She's my partner." Thompson stood, his expression troubled. "I'm sorry you feel that way, Mr. Carter. I'll pray for your family." After he left, Hannah turned to Daniel, her eyes bright with emotion. "Thank you." "For what?" "For defending me, for seeing me as an equal, not a subordinate. Hannah, I learned months ago that you're more than my equal. You're the one who saved this family, the one who keeps us all grounded. Why would I want you to be less than you are?" She kissed him, fierce and grateful, and he pulled her close, feeling the rapid beat of her heart against his chest. The reading lessons continued, despite Thompson's visit and Mrs. Patterson's escalating disapproval. By October, Hannah was teaching 6 women, ranging from Mary Henderson in her 30s to young Sarah Walsh, barely 16 and hungry for education beyond what Miss Winters could provide in her crowded classroom. But the joy of those lessons was overshadowed by growing tension. Daniel began hearing whispers in town, concerns about Hannah's influence, questions about whether she was undermining proper family structure, suggestions that perhaps the Carter household wasn't as stable as it appeared. One afternoon, he confronted Henderson about it. "What exactly are people saying?" Henderson looked uncomfortable. "That your wife is turning women against their husbands, teaching them to question their place." "Their place?" Daniel's voice rose. "What place? Subservient? Ignorant?" "Daniel, I don't agree with it. Mary loves those lessons, and I love seeing her excited about learning. But some men feel threatened. They think educated wives will be harder to control." "Good. Maybe they should be harder to control." "I agree. But you need to know what you're up against. There's talk of taking this to the church council, of asking Hannah to stop the lessons." That evening, Daniel told Hannah what Henderson had said. She listened quietly, her face growing pale. "They want me to stop teaching women to read. They're afraid of what you represent, change, challenge to the status quo." Hannah stood and walked to the window, staring out at the darkening sky. "What if I do stop? What if I just focus on our family, keep my head down, don't make waves? Is that what you want?" "No. But Daniel, I don't want to bring trouble to your door. The children have been through so much already. If my actions cause problems for you, for them—" "Hannah," Daniel crossed to her, turning her to face him. "When you stood up for Miss Winters, you taught Emily that women's education matters. When you started teaching Mary and the others, you showed Rosie that learning doesn't stop at childhood. And when you refused to shrink yourself to make others comfortable, you demonstrated to all of our children that integrity matters more than approval. But the cost is worth it. Because what you're teaching them, independence, courage, the value of knowledge, that's going to serve them their whole lives." He cupped her face. "Don't stop being who you are because scared men want their wives to remain ignorant. Be the woman our daughter needs to see. Be the example that shows her women can be anything they choose to be." Hannah's eyes filled with tears. "What if the church council forces the issue? Then we'll deal with it together. But Hannah, I won't ask you to make yourself smaller so others can feel bigger." The church council meeting happened on a cold November evening. Daniel and Hannah attended together, walking into the small room behind the sanctuary where 12 men sat in judgment of how a woman chose to spend her Tuesday afternoons. Reverend Thompson opened the meeting with prayer that then addressed the issue at hand. "We've gathered to discuss concerns about Mrs. Carter's reading lessons. Several members of the congregation feel these lessons are inappropriate and potentially harmful to family harmony." "Harmful how?" Daniel asked. One of the councilmen, a farmer named Hutchins, spoke up. "My wife has been attending these lessons. She's changed. She questions things now, has opinions about matters that don't concern her. It's disruptive." "Matters like what?" Hannah asked quietly. Hutchins flushed. "Politics, business, things that are men's purview. And you believe women shouldn't have opinions on these topics?" "I believe women should focus on their God-given roles." "Where in Scripture does it say women shouldn't read?" Hannah interrupted. "Where does it say we shouldn't educate ourselves, form opinions, engage with the world beyond our kitchens?" "The Bible is clear about wives submitting to husbands. It's also clear about husbands loving their wives as Christ loved the church," Daniel interjected. "Did Christ want his church ignorant and submissive, or educated and engaged?" The room erupted in argument. Some men supported Hutchins, others sided with Daniel. Thompson tried to restore order, his voice rising over the chaos. Finally, Hannah stood. The movement was quiet but commanding, and slowly the room fell silent. "Gentlemen, I understand your concerns. Change is frightening. The idea that women might think for themselves, might question, might want more than what's traditionally been offered. That's threatening to a world that's always worked a certain way." She paused, making eye contact with each man in turn. "But that world is ending whether you acknowledge it or not. Women are reading, learning, working, making choices. You can fight that change and make enemies of your wives and daughters. Or you can embrace it and build partnerships with women who are educated, capable, and choosing to be with you rather than forced by circumstance." You're advocating for the dissolution of family structure, Hutchins said. No, I'm advocating for family structures built on mutual respect rather than enforced submission. My husband doesn't need me to be ignorant to feel secure in his role as head of our household. He needs me to be capable, intelligent, and engaged so we can be true partners in building our life. Thompson cleared his throat. Mrs. Carter, the concern is that you're teaching other women to disrespect their husbands. I'm teaching them to read, Reverend. If that leads to disrespect, perhaps the problem isn't the reading. The silence that followed was heavy with implication. Finally, one of the younger councilmen spoke up. I don't see how we can tell a woman she's not allowed to teach other women to read. It's not illegal. It's not immoral. And frankly, it's none of our business what women do with their Tuesday afternoons. Here, another agreed. My wife can barely write her own name. If Mrs. Carter can change that, more power to her. Hutchins stood angrily. This is exactly what I'm talking about. Women gaining power. Women gaining literacy, Daniel corrected. There's a difference. The vote, when it came, was closer than Daniel would have liked. 7-5 in favor of allowing Hannah to continue her lessons, with the stipulation that they remain focused on basic literacy and not venture into political or controversial topics. What exactly constitutes controversial topics? Hannah asked. Use your judgment, Mrs. Carter, Thompson said wearily. Just try not to completely upend the social order. Walking home under a sky brilliant with stars, Hannah was quiet. Daniel let her process, knowing she needed space to work through whatever she was feeling. Finally, she spoke. 7-5. That means almost half the council wanted to forbid me from teaching women to read. But more than half supported you. Focus on that. How can I? Daniel, those 5 men, they truly believe women are better off ignorant. What kind of world do they want to build? One that's dying. Hannah, you heard the younger men. The tide is turning. It's just turning slowly. She stopped walking, turning to face him. What if it's not turning fast enough? What if Emily grows up and has to fight these same battles? What if Rosie does? Then at least they'll know how to fight, because they have you as an example. He pulled her close. You stood in front of that council and spoke truth to power. You didn't back down, didn't apologize for being intelligent and capable. Our daughters saw that. They'll remember it. Hannah rested her head against his chest. I'm tired of fighting. I know, but you're also not someone who can stop. It's not in your nature to see injustice and accept it quietly. Maybe that's my flaw. No, love. That's your strength, and it's one of the many reasons I fell in love with you. They stood there under the vast Wyoming sky, holding each other against the cold and the exhaustion and the knowledge that the fight wasn't over. But they had each other, they had their children, and they had the conviction that what they were building, a family based on partnership, respect, and equality, was worth defending. Whatever battles tomorrow brought, they would face them together. Winter arrived early that year, sweeping down from the mountains with a vengeance that turned the world white and silent. The first real snow came in late November, blanketing the ranch in drifts that reached halfway up the barn door. Daniel and the boys worked from dawn to dusk, ensuring the cattle had access to hay and water, while Hannah and Emily fortified the house against the cold. The reading lessons moved indoors permanently, the women gathering around Hannah's kitchen stove twice a week, their children playing in the parlor while they labored over primers and slates. The controversy had died down somewhat, replaced by the more immediate concerns of surviving a harsh winter, but tension still simmered beneath the surface of community interactions. It was during one of these lessons, on a particularly bitter December afternoon, that Mary Henderson arrived late, her face pale and her hands shaking as she removed her snow-covered cloak. "Mary, what's wrong?" Hannah asked, guiding her to a chair near the stove. Mary's eyes filled with tears. "It's my Robert. He's had an accident. The barn roof collapsed under the snow weight. His leg is badly broken, and the doctor says he won't be able to work for months." The other women gathered around, offering comfort and concern. Hannah's mind was already working through the implications. The Hendersons had 3 children, a modest ranch, and no savings to speak of. Without Robert's labor, they would struggle to survive the winter. "What will you do?" Sarah Walsh asked. "I don't know." Mary wiped her eyes. "The doctor bills alone will take everything we have, And someone needs to manage the ranch work, but I don't know how. Robert always handled everything outside the house. Hannah exchanged a glance with the other women, seeing her own thoughts reflected in their faces. This was exactly the kind of situation that showed why women needed to be more than just housekeepers. They needed skills, knowledge, the ability to manage when crisis struck. "We'll help," Hannah said firmly. "Our husbands can take turns checking your cattle, mending fences, handling the heavy work. And Mary, you're going to learn to manage that ranch yourself." "I can't possibly." "You can. You're intelligent, capable, and you've lived on that ranch for 15 years. You know more than you think you do." Hannah looked around at the other women. "We all do. It's time we proved it." That evening, Hannah presented the plan to Daniel. "The men can handle the physical labor, but Mary needs to learn ranch management, accounting, livestock assessment, negotiation with buyers. Things Robert always kept from her because he thought she didn't need to know." Daniel listened, then nodded slowly. "It's a good plan. But Hannah, you realize this is exactly the kind of thing that will set Hutchins and his allies off again. Women managing ranches, making business decisions. I don't care." Hannah's voice was steel. "Mary's family will starve if she can't step up. Her comfort with gender roles matters less than her children's survival." "I agree. I'm just warning you about the backlash. Let them talk. We have work to do." The community response was mixed. Some ranchers, including Henderson himself, were grateful for the help and didn't care that a woman was learning to run a ranch. Others grumbled about the impropriety of it all, about women getting ideas above their station. Mrs. Patterson predictably was scandalized. She made her feelings known after church one Sunday, her voice carrying across the yard. "It's unnatural, that's what it is. A woman negotiating cattle prices, managing ranch hands. What's next? Women voting? Running for office? Would that be so terrible?" The question came from Emily, who had been listening with increasing indignation. The adults turned to stare at her. Mrs. Patterson's face went red. "Young lady, you should show more respect." "Respect for what?" "For the idea that half the population should remain ignorant and powerless." Emily's voice was steady, though her hands shook. "Mrs. Henderson is learning to save her family. That's not unnatural. That's survival." "Emily," Hannah said quietly, pride and concern warring in her voice. "Perhaps—" "No, Mama." The word, Mama, not Hannah, stopped everyone cold. Emily had never called her that before. "You taught me to speak truth. You taught me that being a woman doesn't mean being less than. I won't stay silent while people say otherwise." Mrs. Patterson drew herself up. "Your mother would be appalled at your behavior." "My mother is standing right here," Emily said, gesturing to Hannah, "and she taught me to use my voice." Daniel put his hand on Emily's shoulder, his expression fierce with pride. "My daughter's right. And Mrs. Patterson, I'll thank you not to speak about my late wife when you have no idea what she would have wanted for her children." The confrontation rippled through the community, becoming the talk of the town. Some praised Emily's courage. Others decried her disrespect. But no one could ignore the fundamental question she'd raised. Why should women be kept from knowledge that might save their families? The answer came in February, when Mary Henderson successfully negotiated the sale of a portion of her herd, getting a price higher than Robert had achieved the previous year. She'd done her research, understood the market, and refused to be lowballed by buyers who assumed a woman wouldn't know any better. When word spread of her success, something shifted. Women began asking different questions of their husbands, about finances, about business decisions, about the work that happened outside the domestic sphere. Men who had always handled everything alone found their wives wanting to be partners in all aspects of their lives, not just the household. Not everyone welcomed this change. Hutchins made good on his threat to cause trouble, spreading rumors that the Carter household was a den of radical ideas, that Hannah was corrupting good Christian women with dangerous notions of equality. The rumors reached a crescendo in March, when someone, Daniel suspected Hutchins, reported to the territorial authorities that Hannah was running an unlicensed school, potentially in violation of education regulations. An inspector arrived on a cold spring morning, a thin man with wire-rimmed spectacles and an air of bureaucratic importance. Daniel met him in the yard, tension coiling in his gut. "Mr. Carter, I'm Inspector Morrison from the Territorial Education Office. I'm here to investigate reports of unlicensed educational activities. My wife teaches women to read in our kitchen twice a week. There's no charge, no formal curriculum, no certification claimed. It's neighbors helping neighbors. Nevertheless, if education is being provided, certain standards must be met. Morrison pulled out a notebook. I'll need to observe these lessons, interview the participants, assess the materials being used. Hannah appeared on the porch, wiping her hands on her apron. Inspector Morrison, you're welcome to observe whenever you'd like. We meet tomorrow afternoon at 2 o'clock. The inspector arrived the next day to find 7 women gathered around Hannah's kitchen table, ranging in age from 16 to 50. Their children played in the next room, supervised by Emily. The lesson in progress was simple, practicing writing their names and addresses. Morrison watched for nearly an hour, taking notes, occasionally asking questions. The women were nervous at first, but Hannah's calm presence steadied them. She corrected mistakes gently, encouraged effort, celebrated small victories. When the lesson ended, Morrison asked to speak with Hannah and Daniel privately. His expression was unreadable as he flipped through his notes. Mrs. Carter, I've reviewed your methods, materials, and the testimony of your students. I have several observations. Hannah's hand found Daniel's under the table, squeezing tight. First, you're providing a valuable service. Adult literacy is a significant problem in this territory, particularly among women. Second, your methods are sound, patient, encouraging, appropriate to your students' levels. Third, the women I spoke with are uniformly grateful for the opportunity you're providing. Daniel felt Hannah relax slightly. So there's no issue with the lessons continuing? Legally, no. You're not charging money, not claiming to be a certified teacher, not operating a formal school. What you're doing is charitable work. Morrison closed his notebook. However, I was told by the person who filed the complaint that you're teaching dangerous radical ideas, encouraging women to abandon their families, undermining community stability. That's absurd, Daniel said. I agree. What I observed was women learning a basic skill that will help them manage their households, educate their children, and participate more fully in community life. Morrison stood. I'll be filing a report that clears you of any wrongdoing. But Mrs. Carter, I'd advise caution. You've made powerful enemies by challenging traditional structures. They may not stop with baseless complaints. After he left, Hannah sank into a chair, all the tension draining out of her at once. I thought we were finished. We're not. But Hannah, Morrison was right about one thing. You've made enemies. People who see your success as a threat to their way of life. What do I do? Stop teaching? Let women remain illiterate because it makes insecure men feel better? No, you keep doing what you're doing, but we stay vigilant. The vigilance paid off when Emily overheard a conversation at the general store. Hutchins and 2 other men were discussing ways to solve the Hannah problem, vague enough to be deniable, but ominous in implication. Emily reported this to her parents that evening, her face tight with worry. Papa, they sounded serious, like they were planning something. Daniel felt cold rage settle in his chest. What exactly did they say? That things would be better if Hannah learned her place, that maybe a woman alone in the house with just children wouldn't feel so confident teaching other women to be disobedient. Hannah's face went pale. They're threatening violence? I don't know. Maybe just intimidation. But Emily's right. They sounded serious. The next week proved Emily's concerns valid. Daniel came in from the far pasture to find Hannah in the kitchen, her hands shaking as she held a piece of paper. The children clustered around her, their faces frightened. What happened? Daniel demanded. Hannah handed him the paper. It was a crude drawing, a woman in a dress hanging from a tree with the words "Witches Burn" scrawled beneath. Noah stepped forward, his young face hard with anger. It was stuck to the front door. I found it when I came in from chores. Daniel felt something in him go cold and deadly calm. Did anyone see who left it? No, but Papa, we can't let them get away with this. They threatened Hannah. I know, son, and they won't. Daniel turned to Hannah, who had composed herself but was still pale. Are you all right? I'm angry and frightened, but mostly angry. She looked at the paper again. They want me to be scared into silence, to stop teaching, stop challenging, stop existing as anything more than a meek, obedient woman. What are you going to do? Emily asked. Hannah met her stepdaughter's eyes, and something fierce passed between them. I'm going to teach my lesson tomorrow exactly as planned, and I'm going to report this threat to the sheriff. The sheriff, a practical man named Carson, took the threat seriously but admitted there was little he could do without knowing who was responsible. I'll increase patrols past your ranch. Keep an eye out for trouble. But Mrs. Carter, you might want to consider stopping these lessons, at least until things calm down. I appreciate your concern, Sheriff, but I won't be intimidated into silence. Carson sighed. I figured you'd say that. You're as stubborn as your husband. It's one of my better qualities. The next Tuesday, the reading lesson proceeded as usual, but with additions. Daniel stayed home from ranch work, positioning himself where he could see both the approach to the house and the women in the kitchen. Henderson and two other sympathetic ranchers made excuses to be working nearby, their rifles visible in their saddle scabbards. The lesson itself was tense, the women jumpy at every sound. But Hannah pressed on, refusing to let fear dictate their actions. They read from primers, practiced writing, discussed a newspaper article about women's education in Boston. Nothing happened that day, or the next week. But the tension in the community had reached a breaking point. People were choosing sides, those who supported Hannah's work and those who saw it as a dangerous disruption of natural order. The confrontation came, finally, on a warm April afternoon. Daniel was in town picking up supplies when he found Hutchins holding court in front of the general store, his voice loud and angry. It's gotten out of hand. Women questioning their husbands, wanting say in family decisions, demanding to know about ranch finances. This is all because of that Carter woman and her radical ideas. You mean teaching women to read? Daniel's voice cut across Hutchins' rant. The crowd turned. Hutchins' face flushed. I mean teaching them to be dissatisfied with their proper roles. And what role is that exactly? Ignorant? Powerless? Completely dependent on men who may or may not have their best interests at heart? A woman's place is in the home, supporting her husband. My wife is in the home. She cooks, cleans, raises our children. She also reads, thinks, has opinions, and teaches other women to do the same. Those things aren't mutually exclusive. Your wife is an aberration, a woman who's forgotten her place. Daniel stepped closer, his voice dropping to something cold and dangerous. My wife saved my family when I was drowning in grief and incompetence. She stood up to lawyers and judges and won custody of my children. She's teaching women skills that might save their families in crisis. If that's an aberration, I'll take it over your version of proper womanhood any day. She's turning women against their natural order. No, she's showing them they're capable of more than you're comfortable with. And that terrifies you because if women are educated and capable, they might choose to leave men who treat them as property instead of partners. The crowd had grown, people drawn by the raised voices. Henderson stepped forward, his legs still in a brace, but his voice strong. My wife learned ranch management from Mrs. Carter. That knowledge saved our family when I couldn't work. I'm grateful for that, not threatened by it. Walsh, the store owner, added his voice. My Sarah is learning to keep books, manage accounts. She's already caught 3 errors in my ledgers. Having an educated wife makes my business stronger, not weaker. One by one, other men spoke up, some supporting Hannah, others siding with Hutchins. The division was stark. The community split down the middle. Finally, Reverend Thompson stepped forward, his voice cutting through the argument. Gentlemen, please, this is neither the time nor the place for this discussion. Then when is? Daniel demanded. How long do we avoid talking about the fact that half our population is kept deliberately ignorant because it makes the other half feel powerful? Thompson looked troubled. Mr. Carter, I understand your passion, but surely you see that there are dangers in disrupting traditional structures too quickly. The only danger I see is in maintaining structures that limit human potential based on arbitrary characteristics like gender. Daniel looked around at the crowd. My wife is intelligent, capable, and strong. She's everything a partner should be. If that threatens you, the problem isn't with her, it's with you. The silence that followed was heavy with implication. Then, surprisingly, it was Mrs. Patterson who spoke. Her voice was quieter than usual, almost reflective. I've been thinking about what Mrs. Carter said in that church council meeting, about partnerships versus submission. She paused, and the crowd leaned in. My husband has been dead for 10 years. I've managed my household, my finances, my life without a man's guidance. If I can do that as a widow, why do we insist married women can't do the same? The murmur that ran through the crowd was electric. Mrs. Patterson, the bastion of traditional values, questioning the very structures she'd defended. Because it's not about capability, Hutchins said, his voice rising with desperation. It's about order, divine order, men leading, women following. Where in Scripture does it say women shouldn't read? The question came from Sarah Walsh, her young voice clear and certain. Where does it say we shouldn't use our minds, develop our skills, contribute to our communities beyond cooking and cleaning? The Bible is clear about women's roles. The Bible also speaks of Deborah, who led Israel, of Priscilla, who taught theology, of Lydia, who ran a business. Emily had appeared, her arms crossed and her expression fierce. If you're going to use Scripture to keep women ignorant, at least be honest that you're cherry-picking verses to support what you already believe. Daniel felt pride surge through him at his daughter's courage, even as he worried about the backlash. But the crowd's reaction surprised him. Some of the older women were nodding. Several younger men looked thoughtful rather than angry. Thompson raised his hands. Please, let's not turn this into a theological debate in the street. Perhaps we should organize a proper town meeting to discuss these issues. What's there to discuss? Walsh asked. Whether women should be allowed to read? That's not a question, it's a right. The question, Henderson added, is whether we're going to be a community that values all its members or one that deliberately keeps half its population powerless. Seems like a pretty clear choice to me. Over the next weeks, something remarkable happened. The town meeting Thompson proposed turned into a series of gatherings where people actually listened to each other instead of just arguing. Women spoke about their experiences, their frustrations with being excluded from decisions that affected their lives. Men talked about their fears of change, of losing authority they'd always assumed was rightfully theirs. Hannah participated in these meetings, but she also stepped back, letting other women's voices take the lead. Mary Henderson spoke eloquently about how literacy had saved her family. Sarah Walsh talked about discovering abilities she never knew she had. Even quiet women who had never spoken publicly before found their voices, sharing stories of feeling diminished, overlooked, assumed to be less capable than they were. And slowly, grudgingly, minds began to change. Not everyone's. Hutchins remained adamant in his opposition, and a core group of men continued to view educated women as a threat. But enough shifted that the dynamic in the community transformed. The reading lessons continued, growing to include 15 women. Hannah began teaching basic arithmetic and household accounting. Several women formed a lending library, sharing books and newspapers. And Emily, with Miss Winter's encouragement, started talking about attending teachers' college after finishing her own education. By summer, the changes were undeniable. The town had evolved from a place where women's intellectual development was discouraged to one where it was, if not universally celebrated, at least accepted by most. The Carter's Ranch had become an unofficial gathering place for women seeking education, conversation, and community. One evening in July, as Daniel and Hannah sat on their porch watching the sunset over the mountains, she reflected on how far they'd come. A year ago, I was just the cook you hired to keep your children fed. You were never just anything. Daniel pulled her closer. From the moment you rode up to this ranch, you were exactly what we needed. I never imagined it would lead to all this. Community upheaval, near violence, fundamental questions about gender and power. Regret it? Hannah was quiet for a moment, considering. No. Because look what we built, not just our family, though that's the most important part, but a community where women have voices, where girls like Emily see possibilities beyond just marriage and motherhood. Though marriage and motherhood aren't bad things. No, they're wonderful things. When they're chosen, not enforced. When they're part of a full life, not the entirety of it. She looked up at him. You gave me that, Daniel. A partnership where I could be whole, wife, mother, teacher, thinker, all of it at once. You gave me the same. A family that works, children who are thriving, a life that's about more than just survival. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the children play in the yard. Emily was reading to Rosie under a tree. Noah and Caleb were building something with scrap wood, their heads bent together in concentration. They're going to be all right, Hannah said. Even when they're grown and gone, even when they face their own battles, they'll be all right because they know what a real partnership looks like. Because they had you showing them. Because they had us showing them. Together. The word hung in the air, simple but profound. Together. That was what they'd built. A life where two people supported each other fully, where gender didn't determine worth or capability, where love meant partnership rather than hierarchy. As autumn approached again, marking a full year since the custody hearing, the Carters hosted a harvest celebration at their ranch. The whole community came, even Hutchins, though he stayed on the periphery, watching with disapproval he no longer bothered to voice. Tables groaned with food, children ran wild. Men discussed cattle and weather, while women talked about everything from recipes to politics to the upcoming territorial elections. The two groups mixed more than they once had, conversations crossing gender lines in ways that would have been unusual a year before. Hannah moved through the crowd, checking food, welcoming guests, accepting congratulations on the success of her reading program. Daniel watched her with undisguised pride. This woman who had transformed not just his family, but an entire community simply by insisting that all people deserved education and respect. As the sun set and the music started, Daniel found Hannah and pulled her onto the makeshift dance floor. They'd improved since the last harvest celebration, or perhaps they'd just stopped caring about their lack of grace and learned to enjoy the movement, the closeness, the joy of being together. Happy? He asked as they swayed to the fiddle music. Happier than I ever imagined possible. Even with all the controversy? The threats? The confrontations? The constant battle? Even with all that. Because Daniel, we won. Not just the court case, not just the right for me to teach. We won something bigger. We proved that families can be built on equality, that communities can change, that one person standing up can inspire others to do the same. You did that, not me. We did it together. You supported me when it would have been easier to ask me to stay quiet. You stood beside me in every fight. You showed our children what a good man looks like. Daniel pulled her closer, not caring who saw. I love you, Hannah Brooks Carter. You're the best thing that ever happened to this family. I love you too, even when you're stepping on my feet. They laughed, and the sound carried across the yard where their children watched with varying degrees of embarrassment and pleasure. Emily smiled, seeing in her father and stepmother the kind of partnership she hoped to find someday. Noah rolled his eyes but grinned, proud despite himself. Caleb watched thoughtfully, storing away this image of what marriage could be. And Rosie simply clapped her hands in delight at seeing her parents happy. As the evening wound down and guests began departing, the Henderson family was among the last to leave. Mary pulled Hannah aside, her eyes bright with emotion. I wanted to thank you again, not just for the reading lessons, though those changed my life, but for showing me I could be more than I thought I was. You always were more. You just needed permission to see it. No. I needed someone brave enough to say it out loud, to stand up to men who wanted to keep women small and scared. Mary squeezed Hannah's hands. My daughters are growing up in a different world because of you. They'll have opportunities I never dreamed of. That's your legacy, Hannah. After everyone had gone and the children were asleep, Daniel and Hannah stood in their bedroom, exhausted but content. Hannah sat at the vanity, taking down her hair while Daniel watched from the bed. What are you thinking about? She asked, catching his eye in the mirror. About legacy. What Mary said about your impact on her daughters got me thinking. About what? About how you came here as a cook, hired to make meals and keep house. And you did that brilliantly. But you also did so much more. You rebuilt a broken family. You taught women to read. You challenged an entire community to reconsider its values. You showed my daughter that being a woman doesn't mean being less than. Hannah turned to face him. Our daughter. She's ours now, Daniel. All of them are. Our daughter, he agreed, warmth flooding his chest at the simple truth of it. 20 years from now, when Emily is educated and capable and living whatever life she chooses, it'll be because she saw you refuse to be limited by other people's expectations. I hope so. But Daniel, I didn't do this alone. You gave me the space to become who I am. You defended my right to teach, to think, to challenge. You showed our sons what it looks like when a man sees his wife as an equal. I just tried to love you the way you deserved. That's everything. Hannah crossed to the bed, settling beside him. Love that sees the whole person, not just the role they fill. That's what changes the world, one family at a time. They lay down together, Hannah tucked against Daniel's side in the position that had become their nightly ritual. Through the window, stars blazed across the Wyoming sky, the same stars that had watched this ranch through joy and sorrow, loss and rebuilding. Daniel? Hannah's voice was soft, drowsy. Do you ever think about that day I rode up to answer your advertisement, how different things could have been? Sometimes, usually to be grateful for how things turned out. Me too. I could have stayed in Cheyenne, found another position. You could have hired someone less stubborn, less challenging. Less perfect for us, you mean? Hannah smiled against his shoulder. I was thinking earlier about what you told me that first week. That I wasn't just a cook, that I was restoring order to chaos. You did more than that. You brought hope back to a family that had lost it. We brought hope to each other. You were drowning in grief, but I was drowning in purposelessness. We saved each other, Daniel. That's what makes this work. He kissed the top of her head, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair. What do you think happens next? For us? For the family? For the community? More of the same, I imagine. We keep building this life, keep pushing for change, keep showing people there's another way to live. The children grow up, find their own paths. And we get old together, boring our grandchildren with stories about how radical we were in our youth. You think we'll have grandchildren? I hope so. I hope Emily finds a partner who values her mind as much as her heart. I hope the boys find women who challenge them to be better men. I hope Rosie grows up knowing she can be anything she wants to be. They will, because they have you as an example. Hannah propped herself up on one elbow, looking down at him in the moonlight. They have us, as an example of what partnership really means. That's the legacy we're building, Daniel, not just for our children, but for everyone watching us. No pressure there, she laughed. We've already done the hard part. We fought for our family, fought for our values, fought for a community where everyone has value, regardless of gender. Now we just get to live it. Just? All right, live it while continuing to fight every day against people who want to pull us backward. But at least now we're not alone in the fight. Daniel pulled her back down, holding her close. Never alone. That's the promise, Hannah. Whatever comes, we face it together. Together, she agreed, and in that word was everything they'd built, a love born of necessity that had become something deeper than either of them had imagined possible, a family reconstructed from grief into something stronger than before, a partnership that had changed not just their lives, but their entire community. Outside, the night deepened. Inside the house, 4 children slept peacefully, secure in the knowledge that they were loved and valued. And in the bedroom where Daniel had once lain alone in grief, 2 people held each other, grateful for the chance encounter that had brought them together. A cook hired to make meals. A widower desperate for help. 4 grieving children needing stability. It should have been a simple transaction, labor for wages, nothing more. Instead, it became a love story, a redemption story, a story about finding family in unexpected places and building partnerships on mutual respect rather than traditional hierarchy. As sleep finally claimed them both, Hannah's last conscious thought was of that first day, riding up to a ranch in chaos with nothing but determination and a willingness to help. She hadn't known then that she was riding toward her future, toward the family she would claim and the man she would love. But the universe had known, and it had given her exactly what she needed, just as she had given Daniel and his children exactly what they needed. A cook who became a mother, a marriage that became a partnership, a community that learned to value all its members, and through it all, a family that proved love could rebuild what loss had broken, that second chances were real, and that sometimes the best things in life came from the worst circumstances. The ranch settled into quiet, the only sounds the whisper of wind through grass and the distant call of night birds. Tomorrow would bring its challenges. It always did. But tonight, the Carter family slept in peace, whole and healed and home, together.